Hi, everybody. Tonight, I invite you to settle beneath your warmest blanket and drift with me back, far back, to the rugged hills and sun-baked shores of ancient Greece, a land of marble temples, whispering olive groves, and myths that echo through centuries. But tonight's tale will wander away from the polished grandeur we so often admire and instead slip quietly into the shadowed corners of Greek life, where hardship pressed against bone and spirit alike, and survival was carved from the rockiest soil. Over the next nights, we shall linger in village courtyards and crowded city-states, stand beneath the harsh sun with farmers and soldiers, and glimpse how life, for most, was far from the glory sung by poets. So close your eyes as I begin to unravel this hidden side of ancient Greece. A land beautiful, yes, but so often brutal. Let us begin in a small village nestled on a slope of the rugged Pindus Mountains, where a boy named Theron lies awake on a bed of straw. The night air is crisp, scented faintly with smoke from a hearth that has already burned low, and his mother's soft breathing mixes with the distant cry of a lone owl. Theron's bones ache, though he is barely 12 years old. Today, he worked the terraced fields beside his father from the first gray breath of dawn until the sky melted into dusk. His hands are raw from gripping a wooden hoe, his shoulders burned by the unforgiving sun. In this village, there is no choice but to labor. The rocky soil must yield its stubborn barley, or the family will go hungry when winter's frost creeps down from the peaks. Theron remembers, half dreaming, how his father's voice cracked when he spoke of the taxes owed to the city beyond the hills. Even this tiny harvest is not truly theirs. A portion must be carried down the winding paths to the local magistrate, who sends it on to feed the bustling police. His father's back, bent and scarred from decades of toil, is a reminder of what awaits Theron if he survives long enough to grow tall and broad of shoulder. Outside their cottage, the wind rustles through the olive trees. These trees are ancient, older than any man alive, and they stand as both blessing and burden. The oil they yield is precious, traded for pottery, salt, or scraps of iron, yet the branches demand constant pruning and care. One storm can ruin a year's work. Theron's mother once told him that the trees are sacred to Athena, that perhaps the goddess watches over their grove. But Theron wonders if Athena cares for a boy whose feet bleed from walking the stony fields barefoot. In the village square, an old man named Leon sleeps under a blanket of rough wool. He was once a hoplite, a citizen soldier, who marched in formation with spear and shield. Now his spear is but a splintered staff, and his armor lies rusting near the hearth. Leon's stories of battle, of phalanxes locking shields, of trumpets blaring before a charge, are told to children when the moon is high. Yet none of the children envy those tales. They have seen his leg, twisted and useless from an old wound, and they know he limps to the fields when the grain must be cut because no one can afford to feed a man who does not work. Near dawn, the village begins to stir. The roosters crow, their ragged voices echoing across stone walls. Theron's mother rises first, shoulders wrapped in a thin shawl as she stirs the embers to life. There is bread to bake, coarse loaves of barley and spelt, and the faint sweetness of honey if the bees have been kind. Each crumb is precious. No morsel is wasted. If mice slip into the storehouse, they are hunted relentlessly. Hunger is a neighbor that stands always just beyond the threshold. As the sun crests the jagged peaks, Theron and his father heft baskets onto their shoulders. They will carry their meager harvest down the steep path to the city walls. The journey is treacherous. Bandits lurk in the forests, desperate men who have lost their own land or fled debts they could not pay. The road is narrow, edged by cliffs that fall away into shadowed gorges. One wrong step and a man might vanish into the rocks below. The city looms ahead, a patchwork of stone and whitewashed walls clustered around a central agora where merchants hawk their goods and magistrates pace in robes dyed bright against the dust. Here, Theron sees boys not much older than himself carrying shields, training for wars he cannot imagine. He watches men argue over silver coins and amphorae of wine while he stands silently beside his father, waiting for the clerk to weigh their barley and mark down the tribute owed. When they return, the baskets are lighter, but so too are their hopes for the winter. What remains must stretch until spring's first thaw coaxes the fields to green once more. The wind has shifted, bringing a chill that warns of harsher nights to come. As darkness falls once more, Theron lies again on his straw pallet, his body sore yet restless. He wonders if there is more to life beyond these hills, beyond the endless cycle of sowing, reaping, paying, and praying for mercy from the gods who dwell unseen on distant Olympus. He listens for the owl's cry, the soft hush of the olive trees, and drifts slowly into dreams where the soil is softer and the sun less cruel. So sleep now, with Theron beneath the cold mountain stars. For tomorrow, his story, and the story of so many others who toiled and bled in this ancient land, shall continue. In the tender hush before dawn, when the first shadows slip softly across the stone walls of the village, Theron's mother, Dione, moves quietly among the coals of last night's fire. She wraps her hands in a cloth to lift the lid of the clay pot, where yesterday's soup has settled into a thick, fragrant mash. There is little meat, only a bone saved from the last goat slaughtered before the cold winds came. She crushes wild herbs between her fingers, hoping the scent might trick the belly into thinking it is full. Outside, the village begins to stir once more. Chickens shuffle in their coops. A goat cries out, restless for milking. The older women gather near the well, their hushed voices weaving tales of small misfortunes, an ox gone lame, a child's cough that will not ease. They speak these things softly, for words carry weight in this hard land, and to say one's fears aloud is to invite them closer. Theron wakes to the sound of the door creaking open. His father's shape fills the frame, a rough figure, shoulders stooped beneath the burden of years and unyielding earth. He nods to his son, a silent command that needs no words. Theron rises, pulling a frayed tunic over his bony shoulders, blinking sleep from eyes that still dream of warm bread and easier days. Today they must tend the goats. The small herd is the family's lifeline when the fields are barren. Milk for cheese, cheese for trade. Together, father and son drive the stubborn animals up a narrow trail that winds above the olive groves, where tough grasses cling to the hillside. The sun climbs slowly, pale at first behind drifting clouds that threaten rain but rarely deliver. Each step stirs dust and loose stones that rattle down into hidden gullies. They reach a small plateau where other herders stand watch over their flocks. Men and boys, wrapped in threadbare cloaks, lean on staffs and talk in low voices. Here, news passes from mouth to mouth faster than any written decree. They speak of Sparta's men training beyond the mountain pass, of Corinth's merchants tightening their grip on the coastal trade, of rumors that taxes might rise again to pay for some grand festival in honor of Apollo. For Theron's father, such talk is as distant as the stars. His worries are nearer: wolves, illness, the threat of a failed lambing season. Theron crouches near a young goat struggling to stand on crooked legs. He strokes its soft ear, whispering nonsense to calm its frightened bleats. In that fragile moment, he feels a tenderness that the land so rarely grants, a reminder that even in harshness, life clings stubbornly to warmth. Yet the spell breaks as his father calls his name sharply, pointing to the sky where dark clouds gather. A storm in these mountains can turn paths to mud and sweep goats to ruinous falls. They must move the herd down before the first drops strike. The journey back is hurried. Rain begins as a spatter, then swells into cold needles that sting skin and soak the thin wool of Theron's tunic. His father mutters curses under his breath, coaxing stubborn goats forward with sharp whistles and the snap of his staff against stony ground. By the time they reach the edge of their village, both are sodden and shivering. Inside their cottage, Dione tends the small fire back to life. She dries Theron's hair with a scrap of linen, humming an old lullaby once sung to her by her own mother. The melody drifts around the cramped room like a ghost of gentler days. Outside, the storm rattles the shutters and the earth drinks deeply, but not enough to wash away the bitterness that clings to every cracked wall and warped beam. That evening, a neighbor named Myron arrives at their door, sheltering beneath a hooded cloak that drips onto the clay threshold. He brings news of a gathering in the village square. The elders wish to speak of debts unpaid, fields untended, and boys soon to be called to serve the city's watch. Theron's father nods grimly. These meetings seldom offer comfort. More often, they deliver new burdens disguised as civic duty. They gather by torchlight as the storm softens into drizzle. Men stand in a tight circle, voices low but edged with tension, An elder named Nicias, whose beard is as white as mountain snow, speaks first. His words drift across the gathering like the smoke from the torches, smooth yet heavy. There are rumors, he says, of increased levies for the coming festival and word that the city's walls need repairs after the last winter's storms. Each family must give more: grain, oil, perhaps even a son to patrol the roads that snake through the mountains. Theron's father clenches his jaw. He glances at his son, slender and weary but already broadening at the shoulders, already marked by labor's rough hand. To send him away, what would remain? A mother and a man grown too old to haul stones and mend fences alone. The meeting drifts into argument. Voices rise and fall beneath the dripping eaves. Some plead that they have nothing more to give. Others accuse their neighbors of hiding stores of grain or silver coins buried in secret. The torchlight flickers across faces etched deep with lines of hunger and worry. When the crowd disperses, Theron walks beside his father in silence. They say nothing of what was heard. What can be said that will not sour the bread or curdle the goat's milk by morning? Back in their cottage, the hearth is a faint glow, the last embers giving a meager warmth that does little to chase away the chill seeping in through the cracked door. Theron lies down, curling close to the wall where the stones still hold a whisper of the day's sun. He listens to the soft murmur of his parents' voices as they speak of debts, of storms, of wolves, both the four-legged kind and those that wear the faces of tax collectors and magistrates. His eyelids grow heavy. In dreams, he sees a world where his mother hums without worry, where the goats are fat and the fields thick with grain. But even in sleep, a corner of his mind knows that morning will bring the same hard truth. Life here gives little freely, and what it grants is always taken back in time. So let the rain fall tonight, a lullaby against the roof, as Theron drifts deeper into dreams where the mountains are softer, the burdens lighter, and the promise of warmth is not just a memory, but a hope yet to come. Morning returns not with gentle light, but with the sharp cry of roosters and the low groan of timbers that have survived another storm. Theron blinks awake to find his mother already gone from the small room, her place near the hearth marked only by the dent in the straw mat and the lingering warmth where she slept. His father's breathing is steady but troubled. The weight of the village meeting settled deep into the lines around his eyes, even as he sleeps. Theron pulls himself upright, careful not to wake his father. He pads across the earthen floor, feet numb against the cold. Outside, dawn struggles through clouds still heavy with last night's rain. Puddles pool around the goat's pen, reflecting the sky like tarnished silver. The air tastes clean, but carries the sharp scent of wet soil and smoke drifting from neighboring hearths. In the square, women kneel beside large baskets, lifting damp linens to be scrubbed clean in the communal basin. Their voices are hushed, threads of gossip and worry that bind the village tighter than any decree from the distant polis. A merchant's wife complains softly that the city guard is pressing her husband for more olive oil than they can spare. Another woman whispers that Nicias, the elder, has promised to spare his own grandson from the levy, though no one dares say so where he might hear. Theron's mother stands apart from the cluster, her hands red from the chill water, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She greets her son with a tired smile as he approaches. Together they haul the heavy baskets back toward their cottage, the linen dripping trails across the stones. The weight of wet cloth tugs at Theron's thin arms, but he does not complain. Each step is a lesson in endurance, each small task a stitch in the tapestry of survival. Back home, his father is awake, warming his hands over a bowl of steaming broth that smells faintly of garlic and old bones. He looks at Theron as if seeing him anew, measuring him against the debt he owes the city, the labor the farm demands, the possibility that soon he might stand guard at the village edge with a spear too tall for his young hands. There is no time for words of comfort. Today, the olive trees must be tended. Winter storms often break the branches, splitting the trunks that have grown twisted and gnarled over generations. Without the olives, there is no oil. Without oil, there is nothing to trade. So they gather their tools, rusted saws, stone-bladed knives, lengths of rope that have been mended and knotted too many times to count. They walk in single file through the grove. The trees rise like ancient sentinels, their roots pushing through the dry soil in veins that tangle around rocks and half-buried pots left by ancestors whose names are forgotten. Theron's father teaches him where to cut, how to slice away the dead wood so the living branches can breathe. The work is slow and exacting, each cut a careful promise to the season yet to come. At midday, they rest beneath a broad tree whose hollow trunk once sheltered Theron from a summer storm when he was small enough to curl inside its curve. His father shares a piece of flatbread, hardened at the edges, and a wedge of goat's cheese wrapped in fig leaves. They eat in silence. The sky above them is restless, the clouds drifting in ragged herds that promise more rain, or perhaps nothing at all. Here, weather is both friend and tyrant, deciding harvests, births, deaths. As they eat, an old woman approaches along the narrow path between the trees. She is bent nearly double beneath the weight of a wicker basket filled with olive twigs. Her name is Eudoxia, and though her hair is white as sea foam, her eyes are sharp as the pruning knife at Theron's belt. She pauses, leaning heavily on her staff, and nods at Theron's father. They exchange a few murmured words. Talk of a neighbor whose debts have grown too large, of a field washed out by the rain, of whether the city's agents will come before the moon turns full. When she leaves, Theron watches her shuffle away, the basket swaying at her hip. He wonders how long before his mother's hair will be as white, before his own back will bend beneath the same invisible weight. He looks at his father, who wipes crumbs from his beard and says nothing, eyes fixed on the distant outline of the hills, where the city walls glimmer faintly in the weak sunlight. They rise again to their work, blades flashing in slow arcs, branches dropping at their feet like brittle bones. Each cut carries hope that the next season will be kinder, that the oil will flow thick and golden into the clay jars, that the merchants in the agora will pay a fair price instead of cheating village folk who know nothing of scales and measures. By late afternoon, Theron's arms ache, and his fingers burn where the rough wood has bitten into his palms. But the grove stands cleaner now, the ground littered with the pale bones of cut branches, the promise of life renewed in the gentle weeping of sap from fresh wounds. They gather the branches into piles to dry for kindling, nothing wasted, not even the smallest twig. As they make their way home, the sun dips behind the hills, staining the sky with colors too beautiful to belong to a world so harsh. Theron's mother waits at the threshold, a clay lamp flickering in her hand. She lifts it high, casting warm light across their tired faces, and for a moment, Theron imagines that this small flame might hold back the darkness creeping at the edges of their world. Inside, the cottage is quiet, but alive with the scent of bread baking on the hearthstone. Theron sits near the fire, staring into the embers that crackle and sigh. His father speaks softly with Dione, their voices low enough to keep secrets from a boy who already knows too much of fear and worry. Yet in the warmth of the hearth, with the smell of baking bread, and the memory of olive trees whispering in his ears, Theron lets his eyes grow heavy. He drifts toward sleep, carrying with him the sound of the branches falling, the old woman's bent silhouette beneath the gnarled trees, and the distant hope that perhaps tomorrow might bring more than toil, that somewhere beyond the hills, a softer life waits, hidden like a treasure in the folds of a dream. Night slips across the village like a dark shawl drawn tight around weary shoulders. Inside their cottage, the soft crackle of the hearth competes with the muffled chorus of crickets singing just beyond the shuttered windows. Theron sleeps curled on his straw pallet, his breath even, lashes resting against cheeks still smudged with the dust of the grove. His mother hums under her breath as she kneads another loaf of bread, pressing her palms into the dough with a rhythm learned from her mother and her mother's mother before her. Theron's father sits on a low stool near the fire, his hands busy mending the leather strap of an old satchel. Each stitch pulls tight with a quiet sigh, a small defiance against the unraveling edges of their life. He pauses now and then, listening for the wind that creeps through the cracks in the walls, or for footsteps in the night. Messengers from the city come to collect what little remains, or worse, to summon the boy before he's grown enough to carry a spear without it dragging at his side. When the bread is set to rise and the strap mended as best it can be, Dione lowers herself beside her husband. Their knees touch, two stones worn smooth by years pressing against one another through season after season of sowing and reaping, paying and praying. They speak in whispers, voices weaving through the soft glow of the dying fire. They speak of Theron, of his strength, of his quick mind, of how his hands already bear the marks of a man's labor, though he is still only a boy. They wonder if perhaps the city might find use for him as a clerk or a messenger, instead of sending him to the walls with a spear. They wonder, too, if there might be a way to hide him for a time, should the levy come before the harvest is gathered. Yet both know that hiding a boy is hiding bread from a starving guest. Sooner or later, someone will smell the lie. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling through the olive grove like a hand combing secrets from the branches. Dogs bark at some unseen shape moving along the dark edge of the village. The goats in the pen shuffle nervously, hooves striking the packed earth in soft percussion. By dawn, Theron wakes to find the fire nothing more than ash and faint warmth. His mother presses a cup of watered wine into his hands. Thin, sour, but enough to chase the taste of sleep from his tongue. His father is already outside, checking the pen, running rough hands over the fence posts to be certain no boards have come loose in the night. Today, they must go to the lower terraces where figs grow heavy on broadleaf trees. The path down the hillside is slick with last night's dew, stones hidden beneath the bramble, waiting to twist an ankle or snap a limb. Theron walks carefully, the empty baskets bumping against his sides as he follows his father's steady steps. The fig grove lies in a hollow where the soil is kinder, dark and moist, fed by a trickling spring that whispers secrets into the moss-covered rocks. Here, the air hums with bees, drunk on nectar. Birds flit from branch to branch, scolding the intruders who dare pluck what the earth has so generously offered. Theron climbs the lower branches, fingers searching for fruit, ripe enough to yield at the gentlest tug. His father works below, gathering the fallen figs before the ants and beetles claim them. Now and then he calls up to Theron, voice rough but not unkind, warnings to watch his step, reminders to check each fig for hidden wasp that might sting without mercy. This work is sweeter than the olive grove, the fruit sticky and warm in the sun, juice dribbling down Theron's wrist when he can't resist a taste. As they work, other families drift into view, neighbors with woven baskets and clay jars strapped to their backs, children climbing trees like nimble squirrels. They trade soft greetings, eyes cautious yet familiar. Among them is a boy named Lysander, a little older than Theron, whose father once served alongside Leon, like the old hoplite crippled by years of battles fought for men who never touched a plow. Lysander calls up to Theron, asking how many figs he's found, if he's heard the rumor that the city magistrates plan to inspect the terraces themselves this year. Theron shrugs. Rumors are like the wind, always whispering, always changing direction before anyone can catch them in hand. They talk for a moment longer, voices drifting above the rustle of leaves and the buzzing of bees, and for a heartbeat, Theron forgets the heaviness waiting at home. But soon the sun climbs higher, and the baskets grow heavy with fruit. Theron's arms ache again, sticky with sap and juice, but he works without complaint. He thinks of the market stalls in the city, piles of figs heaped in broad baskets, silver coins exchanged with quick nods and muttered bargains. He wonders how many coins this day's harvest might earn, and how many will vanish into the city's coffers before his mother sees a single scrap of new cloth for her worn apron. When the baskets are full, father and son carry them down the narrow path to the village square. There, the smell of roasting meat drifts from a neighbor's hearth, perhaps a hare snared in the fields, or a bird brought down by a lucky slingstone. The scent sets Theron's stomach rumbling, but there is no stopping to beg a scrap. Hunger is patient. It waits its turn. At home, Dione greets them with a tired nod, her hands already dusted with flour, ready to bake the figs into sweet cakes that might fetch a better price. She will stand near the market's edge come morning, calling out to passing merchants, hoping her voice might rise above the din long enough to sell each cake before the sun grows too hot. That night, they eat a few bruised figs, the soft sweetness, a fleeting gift that coats the tongue and lingers just long enough to taste something like hope. Theron lies awake longer than usual, watching the shadow of the olive branches sway across the wall. He wonders if there will come a time when he will climb no more trees, carry no more baskets, but stand instead among soldiers or scribes, far from this small circle of fields and groves. He does not know if that thought is comfort or curse. Outside, the village settles once more into uneasy sleep, the night wind carrying the faint, restless promise that tomorrow's toil will look much the same, and that for the people of this rugged land, even sweetness is earned by the ache in their bones and the soil beneath their nails. The next dawn breaks cool and brittle, the kind of morning that teases spring yet clings to the chill of passing storms. Theron wakes to find a thin mist drifting through the olive branches, each droplet catching the first pale light like beads of glass. He sits up slowly, the weight of yesterday's work still heavy in his shoulders, his fingers sticky with sap that even sleep could not scrub away. His mother has already gone to the square, a small woven basket balanced on her hip, filled with the fig cakes she spent half the night baking. The scent of them, sweet and slightly burnt at the edges, still lingers in the cottage. His father kneels by the hearth, stirring a clay pot where a thin barley porridge bubbles, its taste plain but warming. He offers Theron a wooden spoon and nods at the door before the boy can ask what work awaits today. They eat in silence, two figures sharing breath and warmth, but few words. Words are precious here, spoken only when needed, hoarded like grain against the hunger of empty days. When the last spoonful is scraped from the pot, they stand and gather what tools they need. A battered hoe, a coil of fraying rope, a crude iron spade blackened with age. Today they will tend to the lower field, where barley stubbornly clings to shallow soil, the stalks thin but vital to their winter stores. The path winds through thickets of wild thyme and brittle shrubs, the earth still damp underfoot. A pair of crows calls overhead, black wings cutting the morning haze. Theron's father points to the patches where weeds have begun to creep, small, hungry things that steal what little nourishment the barley might draw from the rocky bed. Together, father and son bend low, pulling stubborn roots from the soil, hands raw against the damp grit. They work this way for hours, backs curved like the hills that cradle the village. Every so often, Theron straightens, pressing a palm to his spine where it aches as if an old man's spirit has taken hold of his young bones. He watches the road below, tracing its winding ribbon as it disappears into the folds of the land, leading to the city they can never quite escape. Even here, bent among barley stalks and creeping weeds, the city's shadow lingers. Its taxes, its levies, its endless appetite for the sweat of people who will never walk its marble courts. By midday, they pause beneath a stunted fig tree, its branches more twisted than fruitful. Theron's father shares a strip of dried goat meat and a heel of bread, the crust hard enough to scrape the roof of the boy's mouth. They chew slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. In the distance, they hear the faint echo of a cart creaking along the road. Iron rims biting the stones, a driver's voice sharp and impatient. Theron wonders aloud if his mother has sold the cakes yet. His father grunts, neither yes nor no. Coin is a slippery thing, and the city's traders are slicker still, measuring weights with scales that tilt in their favor, pressing down with a thumb while pretending to haggle. Dione will stand her ground, but a woman alone at the edge of the agora is an easy mark for quick words and quicker hands. When the sun dips westward, they gather the weeds into heaps, dry roots, and tangled stalks piled for burning once the wind calms. They walk home slowly, each step stirring the dust that clings to their sandals, their tunics streaked with earth and sweat. The air tastes of smoke from distant hearths, of iron from tools left out to rust when rain came too soon. At the cottage, they find Dione waiting near the hearth. She does not smile, but her shoulders do not slump either. The fig cake sold, enough silver to trade for salt, for a little oil, for a spool of coarse thread to mend Theron's torn tunic. She presses a wrapped bundle into her husband's palm. 2 small cuts of salted fish, a rare gift that will flavor tomorrow's porridge as if it were a banquet. They eat that night by lamplight, the small flame trembling as shadows dance on the stone walls. Theron listens to the soft murmur of his parents, voices weaving through the crackle of the hearth, plans for tomorrow's work, whispers of what they might trade next, who might lend seed grain if spring comes late. Outside, the goats settle in their pen, hooves shuffling against the packed earth. Somewhere beyond the village edge, a lone wolf howls, hungry, restless, a reminder that not all threats wear human faces. When sleep comes, Theron drifts into it slowly. His limbs sink deep into the straw mat, muscles humming with the quiet ache of honest labor. He dreams of barley fields green and thick, of fig trees bowed with fruit so heavy the branches dip to kiss the earth. In these dreams, the road to the city is only a path lined with wildflowers, and no one waits at its end to weigh their harvest with a sly grin and a hidden knife. Yet even in dreams, the rustle of weeds and the sharp taste of salt remind him that morning will always come, carrying with it another dawn of toil beneath a sun that neither pities nor favors, but simply watches, high and silent above this small, stubborn life carved into the stony bones of ancient Greece. When dawn comes, it does so quietly, slipping like a cautious guest through the chinks in the cottage wall. Theron wakes to the hushed sound of his mother crushing dried herbs with the flat of her knife. The air smells sharp and bitter, wild thyme and pennyroyal, mixed into a poultice she presses against a bruise blooming purple across his father's forearm. A careless swing of the hoe yesterday, a hidden stone beneath the soil. Injury comes easily when work never waits. Theron sits up, rubbing sleep from his eyes as he watches his father wince under his mother's firm touch. There is no complaint, only a grunt and the faint twitch of his jaw. Pain is part of the soil here, woven into every branch cut, every furrow turned. Dione binds the poultice with a strip of linen torn from an old tunic, its edges frayed like the hem of their hope. Outside, the goats bleat impatiently. A kid born just before the last frost limps at the edge of the pen, one leg crooked from birth. Theron kneels beside it, running his hand over its tiny shoulder, feeling the fragile tremor of life beneath thin skin. He wonders if it will live long enough to grow strong, or if its fate will be decided by hunger when next winter comes. In this place, mercy bows before necessity. Today, they must carry grain to the mill. The old mill sits beyond the olive grove, a squat stone building crouched beside a sluggish stream. The water wheel turns slow and stubborn, creaking like old bones as it grinds barley into coarse meal. Theron's father ties the sacks to a rough wooden sledge, its runners leaving pale scars in the dirt path as they drag it along. Theron takes up the rope, shoulders straining as they haul their harvest down the winding track. Along the way, neighbors nod silent greetings. No one wastes breath on pleasantries when there is work to be done, and a sun that grows hotter with every heartbeat. A pair of girls passes them carrying baskets of laurel leaves, their hair bound in rough braids, laughter hidden behind eyes that measure the boy hauling barley with a glance both curious and resigned. In this village, every child knows their path before they can read a single word. The miller, Menalcas, waits at the door, arms crossed over a belly, softened by years of skimming grain from every sack that passes his threshold. His smile is thin, his welcome brisk. He weighs their sacks with a scale so ancient its weights have been filed down to favor his side of the bargain. Theron's father does not argue. There is no one else to grind their barley, and the journey to another mill would cost more in time and strength than the handful of meal Menalcas will keep for himself. Inside, the air hums with the drone of the wheel and the low, steady grind of the stone. The scent of fresh meal dusts every surface, clings to skin and hair. Theron watches the wheel's slow churn, the wooden cogs darkened by years of grease and damp air. He imagines it turning forever, long after he is grown, long after Menalcas has passed his scale and his cunning smile to a son just as shrewd. When the sacks are emptied, they sit on the worn bench by the mill door, waiting for their share to be poured back, lighter than when they arrived, the missing weight resting in Menalcas' storeroom. Theron's father says nothing, only stares at the slow-moving water slipping past the mossy stones, as if somewhere in that trickle there might be an easier life carried out to sea. They drag the meal home as the sun begins to slide toward the western hills. Each step is a small battle against the slope, the sledge jolting over stones, the rope cutting into Theron's palms until they burn raw again. He glances back once at the mill, its wheel turning, grinding away at more than grain alone. At the cottage, Dione greets them with a basin of water drawn from the well. her hands dipping strips of linen into the coolness to wipe sweat and meal dust from their arms. She eyes the meal, weighing with a glance what was lost to Menalcas's clever scale. There is no complaint, only a faint sigh as she lifts a portion to set aside for tomorrow's bread. That evening, the meal is turned into a simple porridge, thickened with a pinch of salt and a trickle of goat's milk, barely spared from the morning's yield. They eat slowly, savoring the warmth that settles into their bellies like a promise. Outside, the village settles too, goats murmuring in sleep, an owl hooting softly from the olive grove where shadows gather among the gnarled trunks. Theron's father leans back against the wall, eyes closed, but thoughts restless behind shuttered lids. Dion's hands rest in her lap, still and quiet but never truly at peace. Theron watches them both, feeling the weight of the meal in his belly, the ache in his shoulders, the rasp of rope burn against tender skin. He thinks of the mill wheel turning and turning, never ceasing, like the sun, like the seasons, like the hunger that comes back each morning, no matter how much they grind away. When sleep finds him, it comes on the whisper of the stream beside the old mill, the steady creak of the wheel echoing in dreams of barley fields that stretch farther than any road, and of a day when the measure of a man's labor might be weighed honest and whole beneath a sky that does not ask so much of the earth and those who cling to it. The next day dawns with a hush that feels heavier than the mist clinging to the village rooftops. Theron wakes to the distant bleating of the goats and the gentle thud of his mother's bare feet moving about the hearth. A thin ribbon of smoke curls through the small chimney, carrying the faint scent of barley porridge, sweetened with the last scrape of honey they've managed to save. His father's arm still bears the bruise from the hidden stone in the field, but today he does not favor it. There is no room for weakness in this season when the sun grows bold and the earth demands hands strong enough to coax life from stubborn soil. He nods at Theron as he rises, and together they share the porridge in silence, each spoonful warming the hollow space left behind by days of thin meals. Outside, the sky is pale and restless, promising heat that will press down on their backs before noon. Today they are to mend the stone wall that hems in their lowest field, a wall laid by Theron's grandfather, stone by stone, during winters when the earth was too frozen to till. Now gaps gape like missing teeth where storms and time have tumbled the rocks down the slope. If goats slip through to the barley, there will be no harvest come autumn. They gather what tools they have, a wicker basket for loose stones, an iron chisel dulled by years of rough hands, and lengths of rope for hauling heavier slabs back into place. The path to the wall winds past the olive grove, where sunlight sifts through ancient branches to dapple the ground in restless shadows. Theron trails his fingers along the trunks as he passes, feeling the rough skin of the trees, wondering if they too feel the ache of seasons pushing and pulling at their roots. At the wall, they pause to measure the day's work. Stones scattered in the grass, nettles and brambles creeping through the gaps. A slow task, patient and demanding. His father shows Theron how to wedge smaller rocks beneath larger ones, so the whole will hold firm against rain and goats alike. Together they heave the stones into place, their breath growing ragged as sweat prickles under the rising sun. Midday comes and goes with no rest, but for a shared piece of flatbread and a handful of olives from a neighbor's tree, offered in trade for a promise of help at harvest. The salt stings Theron's cracked lips, but he savors it all the same, washing it down with a swallow of water carried in a battered clay jug. As they work, voices drift from the path above. Villagers pass with baskets slung across bent backs, the soft thud of sandals on dusted earth, punctuated by quiet greetings. News travels on the wind. There is word of a merchant's caravan sighted beyond the ridge, draped in bright cloth and burdened with goods too fine for village folk to afford. But the talk brings a flicker of curiosity all the same, a momentary break from the sameness of days ruled by field and hearth. Theron listens but says nothing, fingers pressed deep into the grit between two heavy stones, shoulders trembling with the weight. He wonders what treasures the caravan carries. Bolts of dyed linen, brass trinkets from distant ports, maybe even a tiny vial of perfume his mother would hold like a secret in her apron pocket. But such wonders pass them by like clouds drifting overhead, seen, imagined, then gone. By late afternoon, the wall stands mostly whole once more. Theron's hands are raw, where stone and rope have bitten through calloused skin, the dirt under his nails dark as fresh plowed earth. His father runs a palm along the rebuilt section, testing the strength with a push of his shoulder. Satisfied, he nods once, then sits heavily on an overturned stone, eyes tracing the line of the field as if counting every stalk of barley before it even sprouts. They walk home as the sun dips low, the sky spilling its colors across the hills, pink and copper, and the faintest hush of violet. In the village square, voices rise around small cooking fires. A neighbor plays a reed pipe, its thin, wavering song drifting through the dusk like a thread pulling sleep closer. Women sort lentils by firelight, their fingers moving deftly through the piles, separating stones from seed in a rhythm older than any written word. Inside their cottage, Dione waits with a bowl of broth steeped in wild garlic and a scattering of bitter greens. She hums as she ladles it out, though her eyes are fixed on her husband's bruised arm and Theron's scraped palms. The humming is a shield, a soft wall to hold back the creeping worry that tomorrow's work might ask more than their bodies can spare. They eat in near silence, the crackle of the hearth and the murmur of crickets filling the gaps between spoons lifted and lowered. Theron leans against the wall when the bowl is empty, eyelids heavy but mind restless. He pictures the caravan winding through the hills, lanterns bobbing like stars tethered to the earth. He imagines the smell of foreign spices, the bright gleam of copper coins slipping from hand to hand. His father's voice breaks into the drift of thought, a low reminder that the wall must hold through winter, that tomorrow they will mend the fence near the goat pen, that there is always another stone to lift, another gap to fill. And so, as sleep curls around him, Theron carries the day's weight in his hands and shoulders and bones. In dreams, he rebuilds the wall 1,000 times, each stone slotting into place until the field is safe, the goats content, and the hunger that lurks just beyond the dark edges of the village is kept at bay for one more fragile season beneath the indifferent sky of ancient Greece. Dawn comes with the low call of doves perched among the olive branches, their cooing drifting through the open shutters of the cottage like a soft summons back to the waking world. Theron lies still for a moment, eyes half open, feeling the ache that has settled deep into the muscles of his back and shoulders, a dull throb that no sleep can wash away. The scent of the hearth is faint this morning. The embers have burned down to ash, and his mother has not yet coaxed them back to life. Outside, his father's voice drifts through the thin walls, a muted exchange with Leon, the old hoplite whose leg drags behind him like a reluctant child. Leon comes now and then to trade stories for a cup of thin broth, his tales of distant battles carrying a weight that the village boys both fear and crave. This morning, though, there is no grand story, only talk of the caravan that passed under the moon's watch, bright fabrics flickering like small bonfires on the narrow road. Theron pushes himself up from his straw mat, his fingers searching for the worn sandals by his feet. He wraps his father's old cloak around his shoulders, its edges patched with careful stitches that hold together more memory than cloth, and steps outside into the pale hush of early morning. The sky above the village is soft as a dove's breast, streaked with thin clouds that drift lazily toward the hills. Leon stands leaning on his crooked staff, gesturing with it toward the ridge that rises beyond the olive grove. He speaks low and quick, as though secrets might slip through the leaves if he does not hold them tight. Theron's father listens with that stillness that makes him seem carved from the same stone he hauls to mend walls and build pens. They say the caravan has glass beads from Phoenicia, Leon mutters, his eyes sharp beneath shaggy brows, bright as the sea, and small pots of colored powders, rouge for cheeks and lids to make any girl look like a goddess. Theron's father snorts softly. Glass and powders won't feed a man when winter bites. Leon shrugs, shifting his weight to the good leg. True enough, but they feed other hungers, eh? The merchant's purse fattens, the city takes its cut, and we are left counting goats and stones. Theron listens, eyes drifting toward the hills. He imagines the caravan there still, its wagons creaking under bundles of cloth dyed deep crimson or blue, coins clinking together like river pebbles. He wonders if the merchants laugh as they pass these villages, if they notice the boys watching from behind dry stone walls, barefoot and wide-eyed. But there is no time to dream long. His father claps a hand on his shoulder, the touch heavy but warm. Today, they will gather firewood, bundles of dry branches to stack against the side of the cottage, insurance against the chill that creeps down from the mountains long before snow shows its face. They slip leather straps across their shoulders and set off along the narrow path that winds beyond the last barley terrace. Here, the land is rougher, scrub pine and bramble snarling around outcrops of pale rock. Theron watches the ground carefully. A careless step here means a twisted ankle or worse, and there is no time for idleness if a limb gives out. They work in silence, snapping dry branches from dead trees, stripping smaller twigs for kindling. The air is sharp with the scent of pine and resin, clinging to their tunics and hair. Theron's hands grow sticky with sap, his nails dark with grit as he ties each bundle tight with frayed rope. Every so often, he glances up the path that snakes higher into the hills, toward the promise of the caravan, already half vanished like a story Leon might tell by firelight. By midday, they rest on a smooth stone warmed by the sun. His father passes him a piece of bread, tough as bark, but studded with a smear of garlic paste that turns each bite into something worth chewing. They drink from a clay jug of well water, the rim cool against cracked lips. Theron wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, squinting at the way the light dances on the distant rooftops of their village. "Do you think," Theron asks quietly, "that I will ever see the sea?" His father does not answer right away. He picks at the crust of his bread, eyes fixed on the sky, as if he might find the answer drifting there among the pale clouds. When he speaks, his voice is soft but firm. "Maybe, if the gods will it. But first we keep the hearth warm. We keep the goats fed. The sea is for men who have paid their dues to the earth." Theron nods, though the longing does not fade. He imagines the sea as Leon once described it, wide and bright as hammered bronze, restless and endless. So different from these hills that hem him in, the same stones beneath his feet day after day. They finish their meal and stand again, shoulders braced beneath new bundles. The walk home is slow, each step measured by the shifting weight of wood pressed against tired backs. The village appears like a small promise through the trees, smoke rising thin and blue from hearths where other families tell their own stories of caravans, of the city, of dreams they hold close because saying them aloud might invite the gods to laugh. At the cottage, Dione greets them with her usual hush of worry disguised as a smile. She helps stack the wood neatly beside the wall, tapping each bundle into place as if building a shield against the winter that creeps closer with every sunset. Inside, the hearth glows with new life, twigs and bark catching flame that will warm them through another night. That evening, Theron sits close to the fire, the scent of pine pitch clinging to his hair. He watches the flame flicker across the stones and drifts towards sleep, with the creak of wagon wheels still echoing in his mind. Dreaming of glass beads and colored powders and a sea he has never seen, waiting beyond the next ridge, shimmering like something that might belong to him, if only the land would loosen its grip. Sleep takes Theron gently that night, but the dreams it brings are uneasy. A swirl of shifting roads and endless stones, of a restless sea that slips through his fingers whenever he tries to touch it. He wakes before dawn, the faint glow of embers casting soft shadows against the rough walls of the cottage. His mother's breathing is slow and steady beside the hearth, her hands curled beneath her chin, as if she still works even in sleep. He slips outside into the chill, careful not to wake his father, who lies heavy with fatigue near the stacked wood they gathered just yesterday. The village is hushed, the sky a deep bruised blue, holding the last shreds of night like a secret. Theron walks past the goat pen, pausing to scratch the head of the crooked-legged kid that presses its nose against the fence. Its warm breath steams in the cold air. The path that leads past the olive grove is pale in the moon's retreat. He walks it barefoot, feeling the sting of small stones underfoot, each step a quiet reminder that this earth, for all its beauty, is never gentle for long. At the edge of the grove, he stops. There is movement beyond the low stone wall, a soft rustle, then the hush of voices. He crouches low, hidden among the gnarled trunks that have stood longer than any living memory in the village. 3 men stand near the wall, cloaks drawn tight against the dawn chill. Their words drift through the stillness, low and sharp like the quick slice of a blade through bark. Must be done before the taxman comes again, one says, his voice roughened by years of smoke and worry. Better to lose a goat than a son, another mutters. Theron understands before they say more. The men are talking of the levy, of the next round of demands the city will send down like a thunderclap on quiet roofs. They speak of hiding the strongest boys, of trading one debt for another by offering livestock instead of flesh and bone. His stomach twists at the thought. Himself and Lysander, and other boys like them, weighed like sacks of barley. A twig snaps under Theron's heel, and one man turns sharply. For a heartbeat, the dawn hush freezes. Then a rough voice breaks it. "Who's there?" Theron straightens slowly, stepping into the half-light. He knows the men, neighbors whose fields border his father's, men who nod at him when passing with baskets strapped to tired backs. They relax when they see it's only a boy, but a flicker of worry still shadows their eyes. "Go home, Theron," says the oldest of them, a man with a face like dried bark. "It's cold here. Cold and too full of grown men's talk." Theron nods, but the words linger as he turns away, echoing in the rustle of olive leaves overhead, in the hush of the earth waking beneath his feet. Back at the cottage, the hearth is alive again. Dione stirs the morning's porridge while his father rubs the sleep from his eyes with a hand calloused as a plow handle. Theron does not speak of what he heard. There is no need. The worry on his father's face is enough to say it has been weighing on him too. After they eat, the day's work carries them down to the shallow stream that snakes along the far edge of the village fields. The winter rains, thin as they were, left behind a scatter of driftwood and uprooted reeds. Theron and his father wade in up to their calves, the cold water biting at their skin as they haul the debris clear to keep the flow steady. It will feed the terraces when planting begins again. A trickle now is better than a dry bed come summer's burn. The water numbs Theron's feet, the mud sucking at his toes as he pulls free a branch lodged beneath a moss-slick stone. His father works farther upstream, shoulders hunched under the weight of an old log that must be rolled aside or broken to pieces by hand. Each push, each heave, is a prayer to keep the fields alive when the sun grows merciless. They break only when the sun stands high overhead, its warmth driving the cold from their bones, but drawing sweat in its place. They sit on the grassy bank, legs dangling over the stream, water whispering around their ankles. His father passes him a handful of olives and a strip of goat cheese, crumbly and sharp on the tongue. "Some things are not for boys' ears," his father says suddenly, not looking at him but at the water's quiet dance. "But you are near a man now. You should know. When they come for the levy, they come with eyes that see through doors and walls alike. No goat or hen will buy your bones back if they want them." Theron listens, chewing slowly, the salt of the cheese catching at the back of his throat. He wants to ask if they will hide him, if his father, proud and broad-shouldered, would lie for him when the city's men come with their scrolls and cold eyes. But he does not ask. He knows the answer sits somewhere between duty and hunger, where all truths dwell in this land. By dusk, they have cleared most of the stream. Their hands are raw, knees streaked with mud, sandals half slick with algae. They walk home slow, silence between them deep but not cold, each step another beat in the steady heart of this life. That night, the hearth burns low, but sure. Dione hums again as she mends a torn hem on Theron's cloak. His father sits by the door, sharpening the old pruning knife on a whetstone that has thinned with years. Theron lies near the warmth, staring at the flicker of flame dancing on the rough beams above. He thinks of the levy, of goats traded for boys, of stone walls and driftwood pulled from stubborn water. He thinks of the sea again, how wide it must be, how impossible to drain or fence or tax into submission. And as sleep folds around him like the heavy cloak his mother patched with careful hands, Theron dreams not of hiding, but of standing tall at the edge of that restless water, watching it swallow the sky whole, unburdened by the cruel measure of the earth he was born to serve. Beyond the olive groves and sun-bleached ruins of a land that would shape the very notion of civilization, there lay the restless heartbeat of ancient Greece, a place where men and women rose each day to a world as harsh as it was beautiful. In the quiet shadows of marble temples and crowded agoras, the struggle for daily survival wore many faces, some hidden, some plain to see. And so we return, once more, to our tale, deepening our wanderings through the lives of those who bore the weight of that ancient, unyielding world. At the crest of a rugged hill above the city-state of Argos, there once stood a modest farmstead, whitewashed stone walls weathered by wind and sun, goats bleating softly in the distance. Here lived a man named Myron, whose hands were knotted and calloused, hardened by decades of coaxing life from soil that grudged every grain of wheat. By the time the first blush of dawn touched the valley, Myron was already awake, his back bent over furrows half drowned by the autumn rains. Myron had inherited this land from his father, who in turn had inherited it from a grandfather fallen at Thermopylae. A proud tale told by the hearth, yet pride did little to feed empty bellies. Each year, Myron feared the whims of the weather, the sudden march of armies that trampled fields flat, or the quiet dread of a poor harvest that left his children with hollow cheeks and sleepless nights. Yet, for all its cruelty, life bound him here with invisible chains. For a Greek farmer, to abandon his land was to drift rootless, to lose not just livelihood, but identity. Land was worth more than coin. It was the bedrock of citizenship, the foundation of a man's standing among his peers. Without it, he would be nothing. No voice in the assembly, no hope for his sons to fight in the phalanx, no prayers heard by the city's gods. As Myron worked, his wife, Dione, tended the hearth and mended torn tunics by flickering lamplight. Her days blurred together, spinning wool, baking barley bread, fetching water from the well that lay half a mile down a stony path. She had buried 3 babes before they ever saw their second winter, their tiny graves marked by simple stones under the olive tree behind the house. She wept for them when the wind rattled the shutters, but by morning, her tears were tucked away like secrets. Survival allowed no room for lingering sorrow. The children who remained, 2 sons, 1 girl, learned early that life offered no easy kindnesses. Nicandros, the elder boy, at 14, was strong enough to help his father wrestle the plow through stubborn earth, though his shoulders still trembled under the yoke. Little Talia, barely 9, already knew how to hush her belly's cries when food ran thin, slipping her portion to her brothers when she thought her mother's back turned. But the true brutality lay not only in toil and famine, it lived in fear of neighbors and rivals. One bitter dusk, word reached Myron's farm that raiders from a nearby polis had crossed the border. Such raids were no grand campaigns, just hungry men with blades seeking easy spoil from humble folk. Myron gathered his sons and barred the door with timber beams, but they knew well that if the strangers came, timber would splinter like dry twigs. And so the family lay awake in the hush of the night, the only sound the crackle of the hearth and Dione's whispered prayers to Demeter, to protect the grain, to keep the goats safe, to spare the children from cruel hands. Outside, a dog barked into the wind, then fell silent. Myron tightened his grip on the rust-specked spear that had belonged to his father, a relic of battlefields now far removed from the simple terror of defending hearth and home. When dawn broke and no blade had rattled the latch, relief came not with joy, but with the weariness of knowing it would happen again. Always the threat hung over them. Pirates on the coast, feuding clans in the hills, the casual violence of men who believed they had the right to take what they could. No laws guarded the farmer's plot when power lay in the hands of warriors and nobles whose disputes were settled not by courts but by blood. Yet despite the dread that knotted their guts, the people of these small farmsteads clung fiercely to life. They told their children old myths by firelight, of heroes who braved monsters, of gods who watched from high Olympus. Perhaps these tales softened the edge of hardship, weaving meaning through suffering, a promise that greatness might grow from poor soil if only one endured long enough. So it was that Myron dreamed for Nicandros, that one day his boy might stand shield to shield in a phalanx, earn the right to speak in the assembly, maybe even hold a tiny plot larger than his father's. Such dreams burned hot against the cold winds of reality. For the hoplite's armor was costly, the training brutal, and the line between glory and an unmarked grave in foreign soil was thin indeed. but hope was all they owned outright. In the dim candlelight, Dione traced her fingers over the brow of her sleeping daughter and wondered what life held for a girl born to toil unseen, to marry young, to bear children who might not live. Would Thalia grow old beside this same hearth, her hands raw and her back bent? Or might she marry into a wealthier house, secure a kinder lot than her mother's? Outside, the moon drifted high over rocky hills, casting silver over rough fields and the ghosts of olive trees swaying in the night breeze. The land seemed peaceful, almost gentle in that quiet hour. But beneath the hush, life here remained as unforgiving as the rocky soil that fed them, demanding toil, sacrifice, and the constant bracing for sorrow yet to come. When dawn's first rays returned, the household rose again, as they always did. Myron shouldered his plow. Nicandros stumbled sleepy-eyed into the yard, still half a boy, but forced to carry a man's burdens. Dione whispered her morning prayers, pressing her lips to the lintel for luck, while Thalia fetched water with a clay jar nearly as big as herself. So the wheel turned, and would turn again, as long as there was breath in tired lungs, and hope flickered like the last ember in the hearth. For though life in ancient Greece could be as brutal as the harshest storm, it was theirs, bound up in family field and the fragile faith that tomorrow might, just might, be kinder than today. Far to the south of Myron's wind-bitten farmstead, where the sun poured its warmth over the whitewashed courtyards of Athens, life wore a different yet equally unyielding face. Here, among narrow alleys scented faintly of olive oil and goat dung, another kind of struggle unfurled, one less about coaxing life from the soil and more about wresting place and purpose from the crowded veins of a restless city. In a cramped home near the base of the Acropolis dwelt a young woman named Phaedra. Her father, Leon, was a potter by trade, his workshop wedged into the corner of their dwelling. By dawn's glow, he could be found hunched over his wheel, hands slick with clay, shaping the vessels that would carry wine to symposiums and oil to the flickering lamps of wealthier homes. Phaedra's days began long before the city's marble temples caught the sun. She rose to sweep the courtyard of dust and leaves, to carry water from the public fountain, her thin arms aching from the weight of the amphora against her hip. The fountain itself was a place of chatter and watchful eyes. Other women, young and old, whispering news of neighbors, births, deaths, and debts unpaid. In such places, secrets traveled faster than any merchant ship that cut the Aegean waves. Though Athens shone in poetry and philosophy, for Phaedra, the city's brilliance offered scant refuge. At 16, her future teetered on the fragile bridge between girlhood and marriage, a crossing made more perilous by the thinness of her father's purse. A good match might lift her family's standing, secure her mother's weary bones in old age. A poor match, or none at all, would see her days spent at the wheel beside her father, shaping clay until her fingers cracked and bled. She envied, sometimes, the boys who passed her door on their way to the agora, boys who argued about politics and recited verses of Homer while they flung stones at stray dogs. They might someday speak in the assembly, vote on matters of war and peace, stand shoulder to shoulder in gleaming bronze beneath the Parthenon's shadow. For Phaedra, there was only the hope that some merchant's son might find her dowry acceptable, her face pleasing enough, her manners demure. One afternoon, as the air thickened with the promise of rain, Leon returned from the market with a furrowed brow. He had traded his finest crater for less than its worth, undercut by a neighbor desperate to feed his own children. With coins slipping through his fingers like water, he spoke in hushed tones to his wife, Ismene, of finding Phaedra a husband before her youth faded like fruit left too long in the sun. Phaedra listened from behind the door, her breath held tight in her chest. She knew the man they whispered of, Electryon, a trader of oil whose paunch strained the ties of his chiton, whose eyes lingered too long on girls too young to wed. He was not cruel, but his temper was sharp, his purse heavy enough to tempt Leon's tired hopes. To Phaedra, the thought of his touch made her stomach twist. Yet what choice had she, really? In Athens, as in the countryside, a woman's life was not her own to shape. Yet amid this quiet dread, Phaedra found small rebellions that no father's will could quell. Sometimes, when her chores were done and the courtyard swept clean, she slipped into the back streets, winding her way toward the bustling agora. There, beneath the colonnades where philosophers debated and fishmongers hawked their wares, she listened with eyes wide to fragments of talk not meant for her ears. Snatches of politics, tales of distant battles, recitations of verses older than the city itself. One day, pressed close to the stone wall of a stoa, she heard an old man with a voice like gravel speak of democracy, of how every citizen, every free man at least, had the right to stand and speak his mind, to steer the polis toward greatness or ruin. Phaedra's heart ached at this word, citizen. She mouthed it under her breath, though she knew well enough that she would never taste its true meaning. No matter how her mind sparked at the sound of ideas, she would always be spoken for, decided for, bartered for. Back at home, the smell of wet clay wrapped around her like a second skin. Her father's wheel turned and turned, a hypnotic circle echoing the cycles that bound them all: birth and marriage, labor and death. Sometimes, in the hush of the night when her parents slept, she would press her hands to the wheel's edge, feeling its slow spin beneath her fingertips. She dreamed that if she turned it long enough, she might mold a different life from the same dull earth. But dreams were thin armor against the sharpness of reality. As the days shortened and the evenings grew cool, Leon pressed harder for Electrion's promise. Phaedra learned to keep her face still as water when her mother braided her hair, praising its shine, whispering of the fine house she might soon keep. She learned, too, to carry her secret questions like coals in her chest. Why could a city that carved democracy from marble not carve freedom for her? Why must beauty and wit serve only to sweeten the bargain of her hand? One evening, a storm rolled in from the sea, rattling shutters and sending rain in quick, slanting sheets across the courtyard. Phaedra lay awake, counting the cracks in the ceiling above her mat, listening to the wind tear at the fig tree beyond the wall. She imagined herself not as clay on her father's wheel, but as the potter's hands, strong enough to shape something new, to carve even a narrow path through the world's relentless stone. Yet when dawn came, the clay waited, the wheel turned, and the city's heartbeat drummed on, unmoved by the dreams of one quiet girl. And so Phaedra rose, smoothed her hair, and swept the courtyard clean once more, her thoughts hidden beneath the calm mask every woman must wear in a city that loved wisdom, yet granted so little of it to half its people. Beyond the city's marble columns and the humble pottery shops, the restless world of ancient Greece spread outward in ribbons of dust and salt. Along the rugged coastlines where the waves of the Aegean clawed at jagged cliffs, life demanded a different sort of endurance. One measured not by the plow or the potter's wheel, but by the shifting mercy of wind and tide. On a narrow strip of beach, where the gulls wheeled overhead and the salt bit into every plank of wood, there lived a fisherman named Doros. His boat was small, a patched-together skiff with oars worn smooth by years of brine and calloused palms. Each morning, while the stars still clung to the sky like scattered seeds of fire, Doros would push his vessel from the sand and row out into the dark waters, seeking the shoals that slipped like whispers beneath the waves. Doros was not alone in this dawn ritual. All along the shore, small figures bent over nets and hooks, their silhouettes flickering like shadows in the mist. The sea offered no certainty, only the hope that she would give more than she would take. Some mornings, Doros returned with baskets heavy with gleaming sardines or silver-bellied mackerel. Other times, the sea mocked him with emptiness, and he came home with salt crusting his beard and hunger gnawing at his belly. He had a wife, Milia, whose voice was soft as the reeds that lined the inlet. While Doros battled the sea, she mended nets and salted fish, keeping small fires burning to dry the precious catch. Their son, Lysandros, was not yet 12, but already knew how to coil rope, to haul dripping nets hand over hand, to watch the sky's shifting moods as if it were a second language written in clouds and wind. For Doros, each day began with hope, but ended with an uneasy bargain, one that left him both grateful and resentful of the sea's power. The waters could feed a village or swallow a man whole with neither warning nor remorse. There were tales whispered over cups of sour wine at the tavern, of boats dashed to splinters by sudden storms, of men dragged down by the weight of their own tangled nets. And yet, no fisherman could turn from her call. The sea was at once their captor and their bread. One cold morning, As the first edge of dawn lit the eastern sky, Doros rowed farther than he ever had before. Word had spread among the fishermen of a shoal of tuna spotted just beyond the headland, fish fat enough to fetch good coin at the market in town. With every pull of the oars, the coastline shrank behind him, the cliffs dissolving into mist. Around him, the sea breathed and sighed, a living thing that cared nothing for human need. Hours passed. The sun rose and began its slow climb overhead. Doros watched the horizon, his eyes squinting into the glare, searching for the telltale flicker of silver bodies just below the surface. He cast his net again and again, his arms aching, his throat dry with salt. Each time he pulled it in, empty mesh mocked him. He cursed softly under his breath, though he did not dare speak too loudly. Superstition held that the sea goddess Amphitrite might take offense at a fisherman's impatience. Back on shore, Melia waited by the tide line, her eyes sweeping the distant waves for the shape of his boat. Beside her, Lysandros dug channels in the sand with a stick, pretending they were rivers and harbors. He asked his mother again and again when his father would return. She only hushed him, brushing his hair from his brow, her gaze never leaving the restless water. When at last Doros turned his boat toward land, his shoulders slumped under more than just exhaustion. His nets held a meager few fish, hardly enough to barter for oil and bread, let alone pay the debt owed to the local fish merchant who advanced coin in lean seasons. As he dragged the boat onto the sand, Lysandros ran to him, feet splashing through the shallows. Doros forced a smile for the boy, though his heart weighed heavier than the waterlogged net on his back. That night, by the small fire in their hut of driftwood and stone, Doros stared into the flickering embers, listening to the hush of waves just beyond the door. Melia ladled out a thin stew made from the smallest of the catch, saving the better fish to sell in the morning. They ate in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the spaces where hope might have spoken. After Lysandros drifted to sleep on his straw mat, Melia reached across the dark and laid her hand on Doros's arm. They spoke of debts and storms, of the rumor that the merchant might seize their boat if they could not pay by the next full moon. Doros turned his eyes away from her, ashamed of the emptiness he could not keep at bay. He dreamed, some nights, of building a larger boat, one with sails sturdy enough to chase richer shoals far beyond the safe inlet. But dreams required coin, and coin was always just out of reach. As the fire died to embers, Doros lay awake, listening to the sea's endless lullaby. He wondered how many more dawns he could rise to meet the same tide, to gamble his life on the mercy of currents and the moods of invisible gods. Yet even in that doubt, he knew that when the sun rose again, he would push his boat from the sand once more, oars cutting through the surf toward that blue, indifferent horizon. For in ancient Greece, whether one tilled fields, shaped clay, or cast nets into fathomless depths, the bargain of life remained the same, each day a wager against the forces that cared nothing for mortal need. And so Doros slept, his dreams briny and restless, while the sea waited beyond the dark, ready to test his hope again come morning. Far from the salted breath of the coast and the whispering fields of barley, there rose, cradled by rugged hills, the proud stone walls of Sparta, a city forged in iron, whose heartbeat thundered in the rhythm of marching feet. Life here bore a different edge of brutality, one not shaped by hunger or failing harvests, but by the unyielding demands of discipline, obedience, and the cold expectation that every man and boy would stand ready to bleed for the city's glory. Among those walls, beneath the shadows of the Agages training grounds, lived a boy named Cleon. He was 12 years old, slim-shouldered yet wiry, his dark hair shorn close to keep lice and vanity alike at bay. Since the age of 7, he had known little softness. His mother's arms had been the last gentle place, and that memory had grown faint under the hard lessons of the Agage. Each morning before the first gold of dawn touched Taygetus' snow-capped peaks, Cleon and the other boys stumbled from sleep at the barked command of their Paidonomos, the stern master tasked with shaping them into warriors. Barefoot, they gathered in the chill courtyard, their breaths curling like ghosts in the cold. There was no breakfast to fill their bellies before training. Hunger was a teacher as much as the whip. They wrestled in the dust until their skin was raw. They ran until their lungs seared like fire. Each blow, each bruise, each scrape across stone was proof that a Spartan boy was not born, but hammered into shape by the city's harsh forge. Weakness was a shame, carried not only by the boy himself, but by his whole oikos, his family line. Better to die in training than to shame one's father's name with cowardice or failure. Cleon knew this with the clarity of a blade's edge. He had seen older boys who faltered, how they were mocked, cuffed, forced to sleep on the cold earth outside the barracks while wolves howled beyond the city's perimeter. He had seen how the elders watched, their eyes like flint, measuring each child for the steel they might one day wield. In Sparta, a child's worth was not measured by kindness or clever words, but by the hardness of his bones and the courage in his marrow. Yet even in such a place, there were moments when the iron cracked, if only for an instant. At night, after the drills and beatings were done, Cleon would lie awake on his straw pallet, listening to the snores and restless mutters of boys around him. He would remember his mother's stories, how she once told him of the heroes of old, of Heracles who bore 12 labors, of Leonidas who would someday stand with his 300 at Thermopylae. These tales were no gentle lullabies, but promises carved in sweat and sacrifice. Sometimes, he whispered them to himself, the words like a shield against the darkness. When the lash bit his back for stealing a crust of bread, stealing, yet never being caught, for the catch was punished, not the theft, he reminded himself that cunning too was a Spartan virtue. Better to risk the rod than go hungry, for hunger taught a boy to be fierce, to be clever, to be quick. His mother, Eurycleia, saw him but rarely now. When she did, she touched his cheek only lightly, for affection was suspect in a city that worshipped hardness. But in her eyes, Cleon glimpsed the flicker of a mother's pride, a small secret warmth that told him he was not entirely alone in this pitiless place. Once each moon's turning, the boys were tested with fresh torments. They were sent barefoot into the forests with only a dagger, tasked to survive the night and return with evidence of a kill, be it rabbit, bird, or sometimes a wild dog that roamed the fringes of the city. On such nights, the forest whispered threats and promises both. The darkness was alive with unseen eyes, the ground cold enough to gnaw at bone. It was during one such trial that Cleon found himself crouched beneath a thicket, his breath shallow, knife clutched tight in numb fingers. He had spotted a hare, its ears twitching at the edge of the clearing. Hunger made him bold, but it was the fear of failure that steeled his resolve. He moved like a shadow, recalling the lessons of silence, the way his elder drilled him to step where the twigs did not snap. The strike was clumsy but true. His dagger flashed. The hare thrashed once, then stilled. Cleon's heart thundered not with triumph, but relief. He would not return empty-handed. He would not be the boy mocked in whispers. He lifted the small body, cradling it against his chest for warmth as much as proof. In that cold forest, under a sliver of moon, he felt himself becoming what Sparta demanded, a child of iron, a promise of violence, a sacrifice made willingly for a city that gave no mercy and asked for all. When dawn found him trudging back through the gates, blood dried on his tunic, his eyes met the Paidonomos' appraising stare. No praise passed the elder's lips, only a curt nod that meant more than any word. Cleon said nothing as he rejoined the line of boys, each clutching their night's prize, each carved a little deeper by what they had done to survive. So the days spun on, training, hunger, cold, and the ever-present weight of knowing that one's worth was forged in pain. In Sparta, life was not brutal by misfortune, but by design. A machine that ground boys to dust, so that the few who endured might stand unyielding on distant fields where other men's cities would burn. And Cleon, beneath the hardened mask, still dreamed sometimes of his mother's stories, of heroes who faced monsters not with fear, but with the certainty that to die well was the greatest honor. Even if sleep brought no peace, those dreams flickered like coals in his chest, warming him against the unrelenting cold of the Spartan dawn. Beyond the blood-soaked training grounds of Sparta, where discipline bound every breath to the state's unyielding will, lay another corner of the Greek world where life's harshness wore subtler chains. Chains woven not of spears and shields, but of gold, intrigue, and the restless hunger for power. Here, in the city of Corinth, merchants thrived in marble courtyards, their wealth shimmering like heat over sunlit plazas. But beneath that sheen Shadows gathered in whispered deals and fragile loyalties that could shatter as quickly as pottery on stone. In a modest yet well-kept house near the bustling port lived a man named Andronikos, a trader of dyes and fine cloth. His life's work lay not in the weight of iron or the turning of the plow, but in the sway of tongues, the nimble dance of bargains struck beneath the gaze of gods who cared little for fairness. He was neither the wealthiest merchant nor the poorest, yet each day he rose before dawn, eyes sharp, mind already weaving profit from rumor and wind. Andronikos' wealth came not only from the goods he sold, but from his reach. Caravans that crawled the dusty roads to Thebes, ships that bobbed like driftwood in the Gulf, their hulls heavy with purple dye from Phoenicia, prized by nobles who longed to wrap themselves in hues that sang of power. His wife, Callianera, saw to the household with careful grace, her fingers adorned with rings thin as spider silk, yet precious enough to catch any eye. She knew the worth of a gracious word over wine, the value of a quiet nod when men gathered to speak of shipments, taxes, and the unpredictable moods of city magistrates. Their son, Philon, watched this world with a hunger that was neither for food nor gold, but for something more elusive, freedom from the delicate web his father spun daily. Philon was 17, tall and broad of shoulder. His hands had never known the deep cracks of the farmer's plow, nor the rawness of the fisherman's rope. Instead, they held ledgers and tablets, recording who owed what, who paid late, and who might be pressed a little harder next time. Yet his mind drifted beyond the ink-stained scrolls, beyond the hiss of trade ships unloading their scented cargo. Each morning, as Andronikos pored over tablets in the courtyard shaded by olive trees, Philon listened with half an ear, his gaze trailing the sails that dotted the horizon. He dreamed of standing on a deck, salt spray in his hair, steering toward lands that even the oldest sailor spoke of only in hushes, places where spices grew wild and gold washed down riverbanks like pebbles. But in Corinth, a merchant's son was expected to inherit trade routes, not chase waves. One late afternoon, as the harbor bustled with voices, dockhands shouting, gulls wheeling, sailors laughing in half a dozen tongues, Philon slipped away from the warehouse, leaving behind the smell of damp wool and brine. He found himself at the edge of the docks where foreign ships bobbed, their sails patched with colors unseen in his father's ledgers. He spoke with a Phoenician deckhand, learning words that tasted foreign on his tongue, hearing tales of storms off Cyprus and pirates near Crete who showed mercy only to the quick and the clever. When he returned home that night, the house was heavy with the scent of roasted lamb and fig wine. His father waited in the courtyard, his face lit only by the pale flicker of an oil lamp. Andronikos' eyes missed little, least of all the salt still crusting Philon's sandals. "You wander too far," the merchant said, his voice calm yet edged with iron. "There is no future for you on those decks. Your future is here, among accounts and clients who trust my name." Philon bowed his head, though his mind bucked against the words like an untamed colt. He had seen how trust could vanish at the rumor of a short measure or a spoiled bolt of cloth. He knew that wealth bound a man's heart tighter than any chain, that each coin gained weighed him down a little more. Callianera, ever watchful, appeared at her husband's shoulder, her hand brushing Andronikos' sleeve in silent counsel. She knew the danger of harsh words spoken too freely, how they might push a son not closer but further away. She sent Philon to bed with gentle words, promising him that tomorrow he might accompany his father to the Agora to learn how the city's pulse beat beneath the marble colonnades. That night, sleep came to Philon like a reluctant guest. He dreamed of ships rocking under foreign stars, of storms that tossed him overboard, yet left him laughing at the mercy of the waves. He dreamed, too, of his father's eyes, sharp as flint, watching from the shore, waiting for him to drown or return. Morning found him standing at his father's side among the traders and buyers. He listened to Andronikos barter over lengths of Tyrian purple, watched him slip promises and threats into the same sentence, saw how silver changed hands as easily as lies. And still, his gaze drifted past the marble portico to the sea beyond, where freedom lay hidden behind the promise of storms. As the sun dipped low and the agora emptied, Andronikos placed a hand on his son's shoulder. It was a father's touch, yet carried the weight of a warning, a reminder that in Corinth, A man's worth was not found drifting on waves, but anchored in coin and reputation. Philon nodded, his face smooth as polished bronze, his dreams tucked deep beneath a practiced smile. But that night, when the house slept and the wind hissed through the olive branches, Philon sat awake by the window. He traced routes on a scrap of parchment, paths that slipped past familiar ports, winding instead toward names half-remembered from sailors' tales. For him, life in Corinth was gilded but suffocating, a cage built of profit and polite deceit. In ancient Greece, even among marble columns and glimmering coins, life's brutality lay not only in hunger or cold steel, but in the slow crushing of a soul's wild edge beneath the weight of duty and gold. And for Philon, the sea beyond the breakwater whispered promises that no father's will could silence forever. Far to the north of Corinth's bustling quays and marble courtyards, past vineyards draped over gentle hills and meadows where shepherds called their flocks home at dusk, lay a wilder land, Thessaly. Here the plains stretched wide under endless sky, a sweep of pasture and tilled earth hemmed in by distant mountains that caught the dawn's first blush like ancient watchmen. It was a country famed for its horsemen, its grain, and its fierce resolve when city-states squabbled for dominion. On one such plain stood the homestead of Menon, a horse breeder whose line traced back to days when Thessalian cavalry turned the tide of wars with the thunder of hooves and the glint of spears. Menon's land sprawled beyond sight, dotted with lean-tos and paddocks where mares grazed under the watchful eyes of stable boys. He was a man of broad shoulders and a gait stiffened by old breaks and sprains, gifts from a lifetime in the saddle and the occasional unbroken colt that had pitched him into the dust. Menon's pride was not the low stone house, nor the barns with their sweet smell of hay, but the herd that snorted and stamped in the early light. Thessalian horses, swift, broad-chested, prized from Athens to Thebes. Nobles sent envoys for breeding rights. Generals dreamed of squads of these beasts bearing armored men into battle. And yet, for all their worth, each horse was both blessing and burden, for to own them was to court envy and theft. His eldest daughter, Chloe, rose each day before the first stallion called to the dawn. Barefoot in the dew, she moved among the mares, checking hooves, soothing fretful foals with a touch light as dandelion seed. Her father's eyes, once set on passing his craft to a son, had turned to her when fate gave him only daughters. And so Chloe learned the measure of oats and barley, the scent that signaled illness before it took hold, the small murmurs that calmed even the wildest temper. Yet it was not custom for a girl to walk among the buyers when they came, wealthy men in fine chitons, cloaks pinned with golden brooches. When they arrived, Menon and his stable master took their place at the paddock gate, voices deep and words clipped to strike the hardest bargain. Chloe stayed behind, hidden by the fence's rough boards, her sharp eyes noting which horse caught a buyer's fancy, which gait made a man's lips purse in doubt. One crisp morning, word spread of a Thessalian lord arriving with coin enough to buy the finest stallion Menon owned, a black creature named Atos, swift as a storm cloud and just as untamed. Menon hoped this sale would seal his name in good favor, for the Lord's word carried weight from the plains to the mountains. But Atos, for all his beauty, was no simple beast to be led by halter and rope. Chloe knew this better than her father did. She had seen the way Atos tossed his head at bridles, how the whites of his eyes flashed at any unfamiliar touch. Yet when her father and the Lord's men gathered at the paddock, coin heavy in pouches and promises thicker than the morning mist, she held her tongue behind the fence. They brought Atos forward, 4 men gripping his lead. The stallion's hooves struck sparks from the stone path, his nostrils wide, chest heaving as if he would lift off the earth itself. The Lord, a hawk-nosed man wrapped in a cloak of fine crimson, leaned forward, admiring the beast like a king appraising tribute. He nodded once, and the deal was struck. Coin counted, seals pressed, hands clasped in final bargain. But when the stable master moved to lead Atos away, the stallion reared. One man fell back, cursing, his wrist bent at a wrong angle. Menon's jaw clenched, voice raised to bark commands that cracked like a whip through the morning air. Still, the black stallion would not be calmed. The Lord's guards murmured among themselves, doubt flickering like oil on water. It was Chloe who stepped from behind the fence then, her tunic hem damp with grass. Without asking, without waiting for her father's harsh hiss to stop her, she slipped past the ring of startled men. Ados turned to her, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. She lifted her palm, slow and steady. Words softer than a breath fell from her lips. Nonsense to the men watching, but familiar as heartbeat to the horse. Slowly, the stallion lowered his head, letting her fingers brush the velvet at his nose. She stroked the damp mane, her other hand moving to his flank in a gentle promise that no halter could hold him if he did not choose it. For a moment, the only sound was the horse's breathing and the distant trill of morning larks. Then, with Chloe walking before him, Ados followed, one step then another, until he stood quiet beside the Lord's chosen groom. When she turned back, Minon's eyes met hers, hard, conflicted, yet softened at the edges by something close to wonder. The Lord, too, regarded her with interest, as if seeing for the first time that this girl with hay tangled in her hair held more sway over flesh and spirit than any gold clasp. That night, when the Lord's men and the stallion were gone, and the coin locked away in a chest beneath the hearth, Minon called Chloe to his side by the dying fire. He spoke no praise. Words of pride were scarce on his tongue, but he did not forbid her the paddock or the buyers anymore. Instead, he asked what she saw in Ados that he could not. She answered carefully, for fathers and daughters were stitched by words both spoken and left unsaid. Beyond the hearth's glow, the plains breathed under a rising moon. Chloe lay awake, listening to the distant nicker of mares and the wind rustling dry grass. She wondered if her path would ever stretch beyond these pastures, if the world would allow a girl to stand at the gate with the traders, to speak her worth not in whispers behind a fence, but boldly, beneath the open sun. For in Thessaly, as in all of Greece, life's harshness did not only spring from cold or hunger or war, but from the simple cruelty of custom, unwritten laws that tethered even the strongest spirit. Yet in that night's hush, Chloe's dreams cantered wide as the plains, untamed as the stallion who had bent his will to her gentle hand. Far from the restless plains of Thessaly, where Chloe's whispers calmed wild horses, the land turned rough and stony as it climbed into the hills of Arcadia. Here, high among ridges veiled in mist and forests thick with ancient oaks, life clung to the slopes in scattered hamlets where shepherds guided their flocks through silence older than any polis. These hills were the cradle of countless myths, of Pan's flute echoing through hidden groves, of dryads dancing beneath moonlit boughs. But for those who called it home, the hills gave little magic and demanded much in return. In one such village, tucked against the shoulder of a pine-clad ridge, lived a widow named Agath. Her dwelling was a single room of rough stone, its hearth blackened with years of wood smoke. She was neither young nor old, her hair streaked with gray that matched the ash in her hearth. Her husband had been a shepherd like all the men before him, lost to a rockslide one spring when the rains came too hard and sudden. Since then, Agath tended her flock alone, 24 sheep that knew her voice better than any neighbor did. Each dawn she rose with the first murmurs of birdsong, pulling her threadbare cloak tight around her shoulders before stepping into the thin mountain chill. Her staff, worn smooth by years of use, tapped over stones as she guided her sheep along narrow trails where moss softened the steps of fox and wolf alike. She knew the hidden places where water seeped clear and cold from the hillside, where herbs for poultices grew beneath thorn bushes, and where she might kneel to gather mushrooms when the soil held just enough warmth. Yet for all her care, danger prowled close at heel. Wolves hunted these ridges, lean from hard winters, cunning enough to stalk a flock when dusk blurred the line between field and forest. Agath had lost lambs before, once, a whole ewe, dragged off under a hunter's moon while she could do nothing but listen to the cries swallowed by the trees. Each loss tightened the belt at her waist, thinned the soup in her pot. There was no market here to fetch fair price for wool or cheese, only the slow barter with neighbors equally bound to this rocky cradle. A basket of cheese for a length of homespun, a fleece for a jar of honey if the bees had been kind that year. Coin rarely touched her palm, and when it did, it vanished quick as spring melt, gone to mend a roof or buy salt and oil from a peddler who climbed the ridge once each season. Yet Agath did not curse her solitude. In the hush of the hills, where wind sang through pine and owl, she found a kind of peace the cities below could never offer. She spoke to her flock as if they were kin, old names passed down for each lamb born under her care. She told them stories when the dusk settled thick and blue, of Pan piping through glades unseen, of Artemis brushing these slopes in the shape of a doe, leaving the ground soft with moss where her hooves fell. One early winter evening, when frost silvered the heather and smoke curled from every chimney, Agath returned to find the smallest lamb missing. Its mother circled near the fold, bleeding, her sides heaving in the cold dusk. Agath felt the dread settle deep in her belly. A wolf, no doubt, or perhaps the lean dogs that roamed the lower hills when hunger pressed too cruelly. Without thought for the failing light, she grabbed her staff and lamp, following the faint trail of tiny hoof prints in crushed grass. The forest swallowed her quickly, its undergrowth whispering secrets as she pushed through. Her lamp flickered, throwing wild shadows on tree trunks furred with lichen. Somewhere ahead, the lamb's plaintive bleat called through the hush, thin as a reed's song. She found it near a stream, trembling beside a hollow stump, its flank grazed but whole. Crouching low, she murmured soft reassurances, gathering it close against her chest. Its heart fluttered like a trapped bird, warm beneath her cracked palms. She lifted her head once, listening, half expecting to hear the soft pad of paws circling just beyond the lamplight. And there it was, a shape between the trees, yellow eyes catching the glow. A wolf, gaunt, ribs sharp as fence slats beneath its ragged coat. They regarded one another through the thin veil of flame and fear, predator and keeper, each bound by the same hard laws of the mountain. Agath did not shout or brandish her staff. Instead, she stepped back, slow as falling snow, the lamb clutched tight. She knew the beast would find another meal, perhaps a rabbit, perhaps a deer weakened by frost. She prayed it would be enough. By the time she reached her fold again, the hearth inside her stone hut waited with its meager warmth. She sat the lamb by the fire, rubbed its legs to life, and fed it a handful of whey, whispering promises that tomorrow the hills would be safer, the flock whole again. Outside, the ridge brooded under a sky salted with stars, each one cold and distant, yet watching all the same. In Arcadia, life's cruelty was not born of armies or coins, but of nature's indifferent hand. Storms that stripped the hills bare, wolves that waited for a single careless step. Yet in that lonely hush, Agath found her strength not in walls or iron, but in each dawn she rose once more, staff in hand, ready to guard what little was hers against a world that gave nothing freely. And so the hills kept their secrets, the wind kept its song, and the widow with her flock dreamed quietly of spring as the embers in her hearth smoldered through the night. Far from Arcadia's misty ridges, where Agath guarded her small world against the prowl of wolves and winter's silent claim, the land bent southward to the islands scattered like stones across the sapphire sweep of the Aegean Sea. Among these islands, some barren rock, some lush with fig groves and olive terraces, lay one small isle called Thera, where life's cruelty rose not from wolves or cold steel, but from the earth's deep, restless heart. On this island lived a boy named Uinor, son of a potter and grandson of a fisherman. Their home perched on the island's eastern slope, where terraces of vines clung to the black volcanic soil and fields of barley bent in the sea wind. Beneath the calm hum of cicadas and the hush of olive branches shifting under sun, there was always a rumble deep below, like a god's sigh, too soft to hear until it wasn't. Uinor was 15, all long limbs and sun-dark skin, with feet hardened by summers spent scrambling barefoot over pumice and stone. By day, he helped his father shape amphorae from the rich, fine clay the island's belly gifted them. The clay made their wares prized among merchants. Sturdy jars and delicate cups traded for salted fish, lamp oil, or woven cloth from the mainland. By night, he sometimes joined his grandfather near the small cove where boats bobbed on braided ropes. There, old stories clung to the salt air. Tales of a time when Thera had trembled and split open, sending fire and ash to blind the sun. His mother, Damaris, watched the mountains peak with wary eyes whenever it smoked after rain. She would touch the lintel of their door in silent prayer to Poseidon and Hephaestus both, one god to guard the sea that fed them, the other to hold the fire beneath the rock at bay. But life, Uinor learned, could not be shaped by prayers alone. One hot afternoon, he carried a basket of clay cups down to the harbor, the sky wide and merciless above. Merchants from Naxos waited with bolts of linen dyed blue as deep water. They spoke quickly, weighing the jars, testing the rims for hidden cracks, haggling in voices that rose and fell like the surf against Thera's black sand beaches. While his father bargained, Uanor slipped away to the jetty's edge. There, he dangled his feet above the water, watching darting fish glitter beneath the sun. His grandfather joined him, the old man's skin dark as driftwood, eyes milky at the edges, yet sharp enough to catch the glint of a storm before it came. "Does it whisper to you?" his grandfather asked, voice rough as sea salt. Uanor shrugged. "The mountain?" The old man nodded toward the distant peak, its slopes drowsy under heat haze. "It talks to those who listen. When I was your age, it spoke so loud it broke the sky. Ash fell for days. Boats fled. Some never came back." Uanor shivered, though the sun burned his shoulders. He wanted to ask more. What it looked like, how it smelled, how it sounded when stone cracked open like thunder underfoot. But his father's voice called him back to the stall, the trade nearly done. That evening, with the linen stowed safe in a cedar chest and new oil lamps set by the door, the family ate lentils and barley bread by the hearth. Uanor's mother pressed her palm to his hair as she passed behind him, a gesture so small yet steady as the island's heartbeat. The wind carried the scent of the vineyards, heavy with ripening grapes, the air thick with the promise of the next harvest. Yet promise was brittle here. That night, Uanor woke to a tremor beneath his mat, gentle at first, like a giant rolling over in sleep. He sat up, heart banging in his chest, staring at the dark outline of the shutter swaying in its latch. His mother's breath caught across the room. His father rose to listen to the hush that followed, a hush too deep to trust. The island fell quiet again by dawn. Chickens fussed in the yard, the vineyard shimmered gold under the rising sun, and for a moment the tremor seemed only a dream, a reminder that the earth beneath their feet was alive and dreaming too. Days stretched into weeks. Amphorae lined the drying racks in neat rows, waiting for the kiln's fire. Uanor carried baskets of clay up from the creek bed, his feet black with mud, sweat tracing salt over his temples. At night, he sat on the roof with his grandfather, who pointed out ships drifting between islands, each sail a promise that the sea might grant fortune if the earth below did not first take it away. But one night, as lightning danced on the far horizon and the air grew heavy with an iron taste, the island's heart stirred again. This time, the whisper turned to a growl. Walls shuddered, the kiln cracked, Amphorae tumbled like seeds scattered on the wind. Uanor stumbled into the yard, the sky pulsing red where the mountain breathed fire into the dark. Sparks rained on the terraces. From the harbor came cries of sailors cutting ropes, pushing boats into the sea, fleeing from a god's waking hunger. His mother's hands pulled him close, her prayers lost in the rumble underfoot. And in that roaring dark, Uanor understood what his grandfather meant. The mountain did speak, not in words, but in the promise that life here was borrowed, balanced on a knife's edge of ash and stone. By dawn, the tremor eased, leaving behind a silence deeper than any prayer. Fields lay split with new cracks. Vineyards smoldered where sparks had caught. But the people of Thera did what they had always done. They swept ash from doorsteps, mended broken walls, and set their nets to sea again. Uanor's father patched the kiln. His mother pressed her palm to the lintel once more. For in this island life, beautiful, fragile, perched on the back of fire, brutality hid not in armies or hunger alone, but in the ground beneath their feet, a reminder that for all they shaped from clay, they could not shape the earth's will. And so Uanor, son of potters, grandson of sailors, rose with the sun once more, ready to listen for the next whisper rumbling deep below. North of the trembling islands and the sun-scoured plains, beyond the vineyards and olive groves, the land rose into rugged folds where the forests of Epirus spread their deep, brooding canopy. Here, the world seemed older than stone temples or city assemblies, a place of gnarled oaks and black pines, rivers cold and quick with meltwater, and villages so small they clung to clearings like moss on rock. In one such village, tucked where the forest met the first stony slopes of the Pindus Mountains, lived a woodcutter named Dymas. His dwelling was little more than a hut of split logs and mud-daubed gaps, its roof thatched in reeds from a marshy pool nearby. Dimas was a broad man, shoulders bent from years of swinging an axe into oak and fir. His beard was wild as the woods he called home, and in the lines of his palms lay the story of every splinter and cold dawn he'd survived. Each day he rose in the hush before first light, when the forest seemed to hold its breath. With a crust of bread and a skin of rainwater tucked in his belt, he set out beneath the towering trees, his axe balanced across one shoulder. Sometimes his young son Petros trotted at his heels, eager yet unsteady, his thin arms barely able to drag a branch twice his length. For Dimas, life's battle was not fought in the agora or by the sea's edge, but among roots and shadows. The forest gave what it would: timber for beams and hearth fires, branches for fences, resin for torches. In good years, merchants from the coast sent men to haul away logs by ox cart, exchanging copper coins and coarse salt for his weeks of toil. In lean years, when buyers stayed away or storms made the mountain paths impassable, Dimas traded split firewood for goat's milk, wool, or a handful of dried beans to keep his small hearth from growing cold. Yet the forest was no gentle friend. In spring, it turned slick with rain, the ground beneath treacherous roots turning to sucking mud. In summer, heat brought biting flies and the heavy dread of fire, a single spark that could turn an old pine stand to black ash overnight. And in winter, when the snows came early and deep, wolves drifted down from the high ridges, thin with hunger and bold enough to circle a woodcutter's door. One dusk, as shadows pooled under the branches and the air turned sharp with frost, Dimas heaved his last bundle of the day onto his back. Petros stumbled beside him, dragging a stick through the brown carpet of fallen needles. A hush settled between father and son, a hush that belonged to the forest alone, broken only by the call of a distant owl. At the edge of the clearing, where their hut hunched under its thatch, Dimas paused. His eyes narrowed at tracks pressed into the damp earth, a scatter of prints, too large for any dog, toes splayed wide where claws had scraped soft mud. A wolf, perhaps two, had passed close while he'd worked the deeper glades. That night, by the small crackling hearth, he carved fresh points for his spears. Petros sat wide-eyed beside him, turning the hafts in his small hands. Dimas taught him the signs to watch for, how to read a broken branch or clawed bark, how to listen when the woods grew too quiet, how to keep the goat penned tight when snow lay deep. As the wind rattled the reeds above their heads, Petros asked, "Father, why do the wolves come so close?" Dimas laid a hand on the boy's rough hair. "Because they are hungry. Because the mountain gives them no mercy when winter grips it tight, as it gives us none either." He spoke without fear in his voice, for fear was a thing left behind when the axe first bit into cold wood at dawn. He knew the forest's moods like the lines on his knuckles, its promise of warmth and shelter bound always to the threat of silence that could swallow a man without trace. When the first snow fell, soft as ash drifting from an unseen fire, Dimas rose before the sun and checked his snares along the edges of the clearing. A skinny rabbit, a brace of grouse. These small victories meant stew instead of broth, meat that would stretch the salted beans and rough barley they hoarded in earthen jars. Petros helped skin the hare, his small fingers clumsy but learning. One night, when the snow lay deep and the goats stamped restless in their pen, the wolves came. Dimas heard them first, a low note threading through the hush, so faint it seemed part of the wind. He rose from his mat, took spear and torch, and stepped outside into the bite of winter. Petros peered from behind the door, the glow of the hearth flickering against his pale face. In the darkness, eyes gleamed back, amber pinpricks among drifting flakes. The wolves padded silent between the trees, lean bodies blending with the shadows they knew so well. Dimas did not shout or strike sparks into the hush. He stood firm, the flame of his torch a fragile promise between hunger and what was his. After a time, the wolves slipped away, shadows folding into deeper shadows. The next morning, he found their prints pressed fresh across the snow beyond the pen, circling, waiting for a single slip, a forgotten latch. In this high forest of Epirus, life's brutality was quiet and patient as the wolves themselves. It crouched behind the trees, waiting for a man to tire, for a boy to forget his father's warnings. Yet for each cold dawn survived, each log split, each stew that bubbled over a sparking fire, Dymas reclaimed a sliver of warmth from the deep, indifferent woods. And so, when the snows melted and the rivers ran fast with the thaw, the woodcutter rose again, axe across his shoulder, sun at his heels. He stepped into the hush of the forest, knowing the cost of each breath and the worth of each small victory against a world that asked no pardon, only strength enough to stand another day beneath the ancient trees. In the waning hours of another restless night in the highlands of Arcadia, an old man sat beneath the arching boughs of an ancient oak, his cloak drawn tight about his shoulders. His name was Timon, a name long forgotten by most who dwelled in the scattered farms and rough villages that clung to the crags of this harsh country. He was once a herdsman, then a soldier, and now little more than a drifting soul who carried stories as his only remaining wealth. Tonight, the wind was gentle yet cold, carrying with it the murmur of distant wolves and the rustle of unseen creatures slipping through the underbrush. Before Timon, gathered around a flickering hearth of dry pine and olive wood, sat 3 youths, 2 brothers and their cousin, who had come to him not for sheep or goat's milk, but for the warmth of his tales. They leaned close, their faces half lit by the trembling glow, expectant, half afraid, yet eager to know more of the world as it once was, and perhaps still might be. And so Timon, clearing his throat and pressing a cracked reed flute into the soil at his side, resumed his tale, one that wound like a rough cart path through the treacherous hills and valleys of ancient Greece. He spoke now of the wanderers, the exiles, and the forsaken souls who roamed the sunburnt plains when the city-states refused them. "Mark this well, lads," he said, voice like the sigh of leaves. "For as I have told you before, life in our land was not always marble temples and olive wreaths. Many a man found himself banished for debts unpaid or for having displeased a magistrate with a poorly timed jest. Exile, ostracism, the wise men called it, was a blade swung not always in justice, but often in envy or fear." He spoke of a mason named Philemon, whose chisels had shaped the steps of the Grand Theater in Corinth. A small man, lean as a half-starved fox, but with clever hands and a tongue sharper than his tools. Philemon, it was said, once carved a satyr's grin on the hidden base of a statue of the city's most pompous archon. The people laughed in secret when they found it, but the archon's laughter never came. Philemon awoke one dawn to find his name scratched on a shard of pottery, his sentence of ostracism. 10 years banishment, 10 years wandering from one rough hamlet to another, begging for bread and work, where none would trust a man marked by shame. As Timon spoke, the youngest boy, Atheon, imagined Philemon trudging through dust-choked roads, the sun beating mercilessly on his shoulders, the stinging hunger in his belly more biting than any wound. In every village he found only suspicion. A mason's trade was tied to reputation, and no reputable man dared hire one who might bring disgrace upon the household. So Philemon turned his chisel not to stone but to wood, carving little toys to trade for stale loaves, or shaping rough walking sticks for old men whose legs had grown as brittle as dry olive branches. But there were dangers greater than hunger. Exiles were prey for bandits who lurked among the cypress groves and rocky passes. And so it was that Philemon, in the twilight of one long-forgotten summer, was set upon by 3 such wolves in men's skins. They took from him the few coins he had earned and the rough cloak that was his only bed beneath the cold sky. Yet still he lived, bruised, bloodied, but unbroken, dragging himself onward beneath the indifferent stars. Atheon shivered and drew his knees to his chest, his eyes wide as the fire danced in them. He asked, in a whisper barely louder than the sighing wind, "Did he find a home, Grandfather Timon? Did the mason ever return to his city?" Timon looked into the boy's questioning eyes and let the silence linger, like a weight pressing gently on their young hearts. "Some say," he began slowly, "that when the 10 years passed, Philemon returned to Corinth. They say he stood at the steps he had once carved, a ragged old crow of a man, and laughed to see his satyr's grin still hidden where only the cunning could find it. But some whisper he never came back at all, that he wandered so far he crossed the sea on a creaking merchant skiff, chasing the promise of new marble to carve and new masters to serve. Perhaps he died on some unknown island, beneath a sky the color of the deep Aegean." He paused then, letting the boys drift into the sorrow of the tale. feeling the sharp chill of Philemon's lonely nights on their own young skin. And yet Timon's words carried more than sorrow. They bore the faint glimmer of resilience, the notion that even when cast out, a man might shape his own ending, even if the world cared nothing for it. From the darkness beyond the fire came the low call of an owl, and for a moment all fell still but for the crackle of the burning wood. Then Timon shifted, drawing from his bundle another scrap of the past. He spoke now of the farmers, those who bent their backs beneath the relentless sun, coaxing life from stubborn soil that gave grudgingly and often took more than it yielded. He told of a family on the plains of Attica, 3 generations bound to a patch of land no larger than a vineyard, but enough once to keep hunger from the door. Drought came as droughts do, and the barley withered in its furrows. To pay the debt owed to the local landholder, a man fat with wine and cunning, they gave over their oxen, then their tools, then, at last, their freedom. Debt bondage, Timon explained, was no rare cruelty, but a common yoke in the age when silver drachmas weighed heavier than blood. Many a free man found himself chained not with iron, but with parchment and wax, bound to toil for another's profit until death or fortune broke the chain. Yet even in this, there were sparks of rebellion. Small uprisings when peasants gathered at night in olive groves, whispering of freedom, clutching hoes and pruning knives as if they were spears. Sometimes they succeeded, driving out a cruel overseer or winning a promise of fairer treatment. More often, they failed, and their fields lay smoldering behind them as they fled to the hills, hunted like wolves. The brothers leaned against each other now, eyelids heavy but minds alight with the flickering ghosts of the past, men and women bound by chains both seen and unseen. They saw in their mind's eye the bare feet in dusty fields, the sun-scorched backs, the hard faces turned skyward in silent prayers to indifferent gods. And Timon, gazing at the slumber that slowly crept upon them, thought to himself that perhaps it was good they knew. For if they knew of the brutal threads that wove their ancestors' lives, they might cherish all the more the warmth of a hearth, the soft weight of bread in the belly, the quiet blessing of being free to wander no farther than the next village path. The flames crackled low, and the old man's voice sank with it, lower and softer, like a lullaby woven from sorrow and resilience. And though the night still carried the chill of distant wolves, the boys dreamed now of stone steps, hidden grins, and the stubborn roots of barley clinging to thirsty soil. So did Timon's tale carry them deeper into sleep, where the harshness of the past could trouble them no longer, and only the echoes of old footsteps and whispered prayers remained. When dawn broke over the hills of Arcadia, pale threads of light stitched the canopy of oaks and pines where Timon and the boys had passed the night. The old man rose stiffly, his bones creaking like the timbers of an ancient galley at sea. He stirred the last embers of the fire with a branch, scattering sparks that danced upward, brief and bright against the deepening sky of rose and gold. The boys stirred too, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their dreams still clinging to them like spider silk. They gathered close once more as Timon lowered himself back onto a flat stone, the bark of the oak rough against his back. Without needing to be asked, he continued, his words weaving them once more into the shadowed corners of a Greece that even poets were wary to speak of. He spoke now of the Helots, those souls forever bound to the soil of Sparta, neither fully slave nor truly free. Their story was a dark thread running beneath the bright banners of Spartan valor, their suffering the hidden price paid for the gleam of bronze shields and the clash of spears upon distant plains. Timon's voice was hushed, as though he feared even the wind might carry his words to the ears of long-dead Spartans who still guarded their secrets jealously. A Helot's life, he murmured, was a life half lived in fear. Fear of their masters, fear of betrayal, fear that they might vanish in the night at the hands of young Spartan warriors trained to hunt them for sport. The eldest boy, Myron, frowned at that, but said nothing. He listened as Timon painted the image of these ghostly hunts, the cryptia they were called, when promising Spartan youths were sent into the countryside, blades hidden in the folds of their cloaks, to stalk and kill helots who seemed too bold, too many, or simply too troublesome. Timon told of a boy named Doriskos, born to Helot parents who tilled the river fields near Amyclae. Doriscos was quick of mind and quicker of foot, a boy who dreamed by the river's edge of freedom he could not name. By night, he whispered to the others that if they fled far enough, past the Tagetis mountains and into the wilds where no Spartan spear could reach, they might find a patch of earth that would not drink their blood. Yet one winter's night, when frost rhymed the reeds and the river sang softly of ice, the Crypteia came. They watched from the shadows as Doriscos gathered with 3 friends by a hidden fire, speaking dreams too dangerous for Helot lips. The young Spartans fell upon them like wolves in the dark. 2 boys died with cries muffled by the hush of snow. Doriscos ran, fleet as a startled deer, his breath a ghost before him. Through bramble and stone he fled, barefoot, his feet torn by frozen thorns, until he vanished among the mountain passes. Whether he found freedom, or fell to hunger, or wolves, or the cold, none could say. But the Helots who remained carried his name like a hidden ember, proof that one could dream even in chains. The boys listened in silence, their breath shallow in the morning chill. They could see Doriscos, running through the moonlit fields, each footfall a heartbeat of defiance against the iron order of Sparta. They could feel the terror and the wild hope braided together like reeds in the river's bend. Timon's eyes, clouded by age yet sharp with memory, drifted to the horizon, where the hills now glowed gold and pale green. He spoke then of how such stories survived, not on parchment or carved in stone, but in whispered tales traded like secret seeds among the poor. Mothers crooned them to restless babes as lullabies laced with sorrow and warning. Old men spoke them over cups of thin wine by the hearth when the wind howled too fiercely against the shutters. He turned the boys' thoughts next to the women of Greece, whose burdens were hidden beneath walls and hearths and the tight knots of family pride. In Athens, a woman might hold the keys to her household's wealth, yet her own life was locked away by custom and fear of scandal. Her world was the loom, the cradle, and the hushed gossip behind the courtyard gate. Timon told of Lysandra, a wife of a modest Athenian merchant who once dared speak aloud in the agora, asking why her husband's debts should drive her children hungry when her dowry lay fat in her father's coffers. Her question was met with laughter and scorn, for a woman's tongue was to be soft as fleece, never sharp as a spear. She was driven back behind the courtyard walls, her voice swallowed by the clatter of weaving and the cries of her hungry children. Yet even there, within the women's quarters, quiet rebellion stirred. They taught their daughters slyly, taught them to count coins hidden beneath rush mats, to barter for olives and wine when husbands faltered, to send a sharp-eyed servant with silver to buy bread when fathers gambled it away. Small, defiant acts, never sung by poets or carved into temple friezes, yet no less vital than any spear thrust upon the plains of Marathon. As Timon spoke, the sun rose higher, gilding the rough cloth of the boys' tunics, painting their listening faces in gold and shadow. The youngest, Atheon, leaned closer, eyelids heavy once more with the pull of sleep, yet fighting to hold his place in the winding trail of Timon's words. The old man's voice softened further, growing tender as a lullaby. So you see, my boys, the land of Greece was not only heroes in bronze and kings crowned with laurels. It was hunger beneath the olive trees, fear beside the river reeds, quiet defiance behind courtyard gates. It was mothers holding secrets tighter than any Spartan shield, fathers walking roads that ended in exile, children dreaming of freedom beneath the indifferent gaze of their gods. Timon fell silent then, letting the wind carry away the last echoes of his tale. He looked upon the boys, now drifting once more toward sleep, their heads nodding like poppies in the sun's first warmth. In their dreams, perhaps they chased Doriscos through the frozen reeds, or stood beside Lysandra as she spoke a forbidden question beneath the marble columns of Athens. And so the stories lived on, passed like a flickering torch from one restless soul to another, each spark a reminder that beneath the marble and legend, life in ancient Greece was brutal indeed. Yet within that harshness burned embers of courage, cunning, and hope that no spear nor decree could wholly snuff out. As the warmth of the rising sun reached higher into the canopy above, birds began their soft chorus, stitching the silence with trills and whistles that seemed to breathe life back into the world. Timon watched as the boys stirred again, half awake now, caught between the realm of dreams and the weight of his stories. He saw in their slackened faces a mirror of all who had come before. Generations who had listened and carried fragments of these old truths into their own days of toil and struggle. He leaned forward, drawing his cloak tighter around his shoulders as the breeze rustled through the leaves. His voice found its steady rhythm once more, and with it the boys drifted deeper into his words like leaves on a quiet river. Now Timon spoke of the mercenaries, those restless men who, finding no place for themselves in their home cities, sold their strength and skill for foreign coin. They were called the Mystios, blades for hire, who bled for gold on far shores where the soil and the tongue were strange. Some were desperate farmers turned soldiers by famine. Others were sons of lesser nobles, their inheritance lost to bad luck or sharper rivals. They carried only their spears, battered shields, and the thin hope that perhaps, somewhere beyond the seas, they might earn enough to buy a patch of earth to call their own. One such man was Nicias of Phocis, a name that meant little in the marble halls of Athens, yet in the wild lands beyond Thrace, his name was spoken in low voices by those who feared or admired him. Nicias had once owned a slender vineyard that clung to the stony slopes above his village. But when drought came and debt collectors followed, the vines withered and his wife's dowry vanished into the purses of creditors. With nothing left but strong arms and a taste for bitter wine, Nicias shouldered his spear and joined a company bound for the wars of Asia Minor. The boys saw him through Timon's words. Broad-shouldered, sun-browned, the leather of his breastplate cracked from countless days beneath a foreign sun. They pictured him standing among other restless men at dawn, their breath misting before them as they tightened the straps of their greaves, muttering prayers to gods who seemed farther away with each mile from home. In lands where the rivers ran wider than any in Greece, Nicias fought for kings whose names he could barely pronounce, defending fortresses of mud and baked brick from other wandering spears. He killed not for glory nor honor, but for the heavy purse that clinked at his belt. Each coin a crumb on the long road back to Phocis. Yet for every coin earned, a piece of him slipped away, spent in the dust of foreign plains and the screams of men who fell at his feet. Timon let that silence hang for a while, so the boys might feel the weight of it, the price paid by those whose swords were all they had left to trade. Then he spoke of how Nicias, older now and weary beyond his years, at last returned to Phocis. He found the vineyard he had once tended overtaken by brambles and thorn, the stone walls half collapsed, the village folk changed or gone. Of his wife there was no sign. Some said she had fled the village in shame, others that she had died in the bitter winters that came after he left. So Nicias, pouch heavy with foreign gold, yet empty of the warmth he had once sought to reclaim, settled himself among the ruins of his own past. He drank wine pressed from the grapes of neighbors, wine that tasted of loss and salt, and he told no tales of his years abroad. He was no hero in marble, no name sung by poets, only another ghost who had traded one brutal life for another. Timon's voice grew softer still as he spoke of how these mercenaries drifted like restless leaves on the wind of conflict. Some vanished in the deserts beyond Persia, their bones bleaching beneath the pitiless sun. Others grew old in distant cities, marrying foreign wives, their children half forgetting the tongue of their fathers. And a few, so very few, returned home to find that home was not where they had left it, nor the same place that had driven them away. By now the boys were silent, the world around them hushed except for the low rustle of branches. They sat with heads bowed, as though they could feel Nicias's tired footsteps echoing in the soil beneath them. Perhaps they wondered, each in his own secret way, whether they too might one day stand at the edge of some half-forgotten vineyard, searching for a past that could not be reclaimed. Timon shifted on his stone seat, wincing as old bones protested the chill that lingered even in the new day's light. He looked at the boys, 3 small shapes in the patchy sunlight, and thought how every village held its exiles and wanderers, men who left and sometimes returned, carrying strange scars, strange words, and stranger silences. In the drifting warmth of mid-morning, he wove the tale wider still, drawing threads of the wandering poets, rhapsodes who roamed from polis to polis, their voices their only coin, singing of heroes and battles, while they themselves slept beneath temple porticos and begged bread from strangers. Some were blind, like the ancient Homer they claimed as kin. Others saw too clearly, and so drank themselves blind to dull the edges of a world that gave them no hearth of their own. They knew well the brutal truths hidden beneath their verses. They sang of Achilles and Hector, of Odysseus's cleverness, yet they knew too the hunger that crept into empty bellies when patrons turned away, the cold nights when the only warmth was the memory of applause in the agora. They, too, were exiles of a sort, wanderers not banished by law, but by the whims of fortune and the fierce freedom of their own restless tongues. Timon's words drifted like the final notes of a flute on a breeze, carrying the boys deeper into the heart of that ancient world, a place of glistening marble masks and dark truths hidden behind them. There in the shadows of old Greece, mercenaries, poets, widows, and runaways all dwelled together, bound by the same hard soil, the same distant stars, and the same fragile hope that somewhere, somehow, they might find a corner of the world kind enough to let them sleep without fear. And so his tale lingered, like the fading smoke of the night's fire curling into the endless sky, as the boys closed their eyes once more and let the shapes of mercenaries and wandering poets drift them into the hush of dreams. The sun had climbed higher now, threading golden needles through the canopy, glinting on the stones and the old worn cloak draped across Timon's shoulders. The boys lay drowsing near the dying embers of the fire, their limbs slack, faces softened by sleep and the balm of his voice. Yet Timon, though weary himself, was not yet finished. There was one last corner of that ancient, brutal Greece he wished to reveal, a final path for their dreams to wander before silence claimed the morning. So drawing a slow breath, he spoke of the orphans and the foundlings, those small, fragile souls abandoned by parents who could not feed them or feared the shame of an unwanted mouth. In the narrow alleys of Athens, among the colonnades of Corinth, even on the wind-scoured cliffs of rugged islands, one might stumble upon a wailing bundle, swaddled in rough cloth, left at the threshold of a temple or the bend of a shepherd's path. In this harsh land, a child could be both gift and burden, blessing and curse. Families weighed the thin measure of grain in their stores against the hungry cries of infants. And when there was not enough, when the drought lingered too long, or war stripped fathers from fields and hearths, some did the unthinkable. They left their children where the gods might find them, or the wild beasts, or fortune's strange mercy. Yet not all abandoned babes were lost to wolves and storms. There were midwives who made secret rounds at dawn, checking temple steps and hidden courtyards. They carried baskets of honey and warm cloth, taking in those tiny, wailing burdens and passing them into homes where a barren woman prayed for a child's cry to fill her empty nights. Sometimes the rescued grew to call their new mothers by names sweeter than truth. Never knowing the rough hands that once laid them down on cold stone, Timon told of one such child, a girl called Irene, found beneath the portico of the Temple of Artemis at sunrise, her newborn wails echoing among marble columns. The priestess who found her took her to an old couple in the outskirts of the city. They raised Irene among fig trees and goats, teaching her the ways of the loom and the olive press. She grew fair and quick-witted, her laughter bright as the bells they tied to kid goats in springtime. Yet when she came of age, the rumor of her foundling birth clung to her like a thorn in her bridal wreath. Suitors hesitated, whispering that no good fortune could come of a child abandoned to the mercy of the gods. In the end, Irene wove her own fate as deftly as her fingers wove linen. She never married, but became a midwife herself, the soft keeper of countless new lives. When a child was born on a storm-tossed night, or a mother labored in terror of the afterbirth, it was Irene's calm hands that eased the way. The boys, though half asleep, breathed slower as they pictured her, moving softly through darkened rooms, a lamp flickering at her elbow, her voice a hush that stilled fear, her touch a promise that, brutal as life might be, there were still those who guarded the fragile flame of a new cry against the cold and hunger beyond the walls. Timon spoke, too, of the oracles and priestesses, women who, though often bound by the same silence that weighed upon their sisters, found voices no man dared stifle. In Delphi, Pythia sat upon her tripod above the cleft in the earth, her breath heavy with sweet smoke. Kings and farmers alike came bowing low, pressing silver into the temple's coffers, begging riddles that might spare them ruin or lead them to glory. These women knew truths hidden from spear and shield, truths that even the sharpest hoplite could not cut down. Yet theirs was no easy power. The oracle's words were twisted by priests and courtiers, reshaped to serve men's hungry schemes. And when the gods fell silent, when earthquakes split the temples or foreign armies trampled the sacred groves, it was the priestesses who bore the blame, accused of false prophecy, driven from their marble seats into obscurity and scorn. And so, Timon's tale drifted through shrines and goat paths, over dusty roads and sunburnt vineyards, carrying with it the hidden ones, the cast-off children, the silent wives, the wandering soldiers, the cunning slaves who whispered secrets under their breath when masters turned their backs. Each life, a single thread in the rough tapestry of ancient Greece. Threads stained by sweat and tears, sometimes brightened by courage, sometimes snuffed out in silence. The boys were breathing evenly now, lost to sleep's deep currents. Their faces, half turned to the warmth of the sun, seemed for a moment untouched by hunger or fear, as if the old stories had gathered around them like a blanket against the chill of the world. Timon, feeling the soft hush of the woods and the distant trill of waking birds, let his words slow to a whisper. "Remember, little ones," he murmured into the hush, though none but the rustling trees could hear him now. "The stones we build our lives upon are soaked in the sweat of those who came before." Brutal, yes, but in that harshness lies the seed of our mercy, our cunning, our stubborn hope. So sleep easy under these boughs, for tonight the old ghosts keep watch, and tomorrow the sun will rise again on a world where stories outlive the sharpest spear. With that, Timon fell silent at last. The fire's final coals glowed like distant stars, fading slowly as morning gathered its strength. And beneath the ancient oak, the old man sat watch over the dreaming boys, keepers now of a tale as old as stone, harsh as drought, yet soft as a mother's lullaby carried on the wind through the rugged hills of a Greece that once was, and always would be, in the hush between night and dawn.